Hello and welcome back to this Damn Idealistic Crusade. I'm the motion picture analyst, and this is my next in the series of commentaries for the James Bond films that I've been doing. This, of course, will cover the ninth official Eon film, 1974's The Man with the Golden Gun. Once again, directed by Guy Hamilton, screenplay written by Tom Mankiewicz and Richard Maybaum, and very much a continuation in style as had been set on Live and Let Die, this being the second of the 7 films that Roger Moore would star in the series, and being the essentially direct follow-up because it was released just barely a year after Live and Let Die. And unfortunately, it's become one of the Bond films often the most derided, and I feel it's really one of the most overlooked and unfairly maligned films of all time, without question. And throughout my entire lifetime, and any Bond fan will tell you this, that there are a handful of films in the series that are often derided by the general public and fans in general. And the dedicated fans of these particular entries always feel the need to defend them, and this one is no exception. It seems to sort of vary which film people like to pick on at any given time. When I was growing up, it was definitely Man with the Golden Gun, but it seems to vary between Golden Gun and usually Moonraker, sometimes A View to a Kill, and nowadays they usually toss in Die Another Day as well. But it's usually the 3 particular Roger Moore era entries that get the most derision, and hopefully in this commentary I can pull out and highlight enough of the great positives and great creativity that are all throughout The Man with the Golden Gun, which is a film that, again, I feel is sorely in need of a reevaluation, and there is no such thing as a official Bond film that is completely without merit or without creativity. And there were 2 specific issues with Man with the Golden Gun that I think really caused there to be some issues and some roughness. And both are things that were really inescapable at the time. And once you think about these and the production history context of the film, and going right into production after Live and Let Die had essentially wrapped, it makes a heck of a lot of sense why there are some elements of the film that are admittedly a bit rougher. But in certain ways, thematically, I think it actually does serve the film's story quite well. But again, most people are not taking a very critical look at, what is Bond's characterization in the film and what is the actual, dramatic meat of the story. So that's something I hope to cover in this commentary. It's very near and dear to my heart because it was the 3rd James Bond film that I actually saw. I saw Live and Let Die and A View to a Kill first, but Man with the Golden Gun was the first Bond film that I actually owned. I got it as a Christmas present after becoming obsessed once seeing Live and Let Die, and of course I was not able to view the films chronologically because the availability, even at that time, was all over the place. So it's just whenever you could catch them or whichever tapes you could get. And I had specifically asked for Live and Let Die, and I was very surprised to see this other film. But of course, it was Roger Moore, who of course was identified as James Bond to me at that time as a young kid. So I immediately popped it in, and it was great because it was a continuation stylistically in so many different ways from Live and Let Die. But even as a kid, I could notice the thematic differences, and that it had a richer flavor overall. There was more grandeur, and it felt, it was the same, but it was different. It was like, anytime you read a long-running book series, which I did a lot as a kid, you get different facets when different writers come in, and over time, it's the same characters and the same sort of adventures in the series, but there are always different angles to look at things from, and different things to consider. So you get a different flavor every time, which is what keeps things fresh. Unfortunately, when you look at the production history of the film, that's really, I think, what caused the issues, was that Transamerica, who owned United Artists, loved that Live and Let Die was so ridiculously successful, and was more successful than Diamonds Are Forever by a significant margin. So Roger Moore had been proven, and to make their accounts look really good, they wanted another Bond hit film released as soon as humanly possible. So they immediately, requested the next film be put into production, and that of course became Man with the Golden Gun. So really everybody just kind of jumped into it, and I think the issue with the film is that they didn't have the time necessary to really polish the script because, of course, Tom Mankiewicz wrote the first draft, in collaboration with Guy Hamilton and everyone, as he had done on the previous two films. And then he kind of felt like he was getting burnt out, and Guy Hamilton felt the same way. Guy Hamilton always said that's why he didn't direct Thunderball, because he thought he had, exhausted all his ideas on Goldfinger and needed to recharge his batteries. And by this point, he had just done both Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die, and then immediately going into his third in a row, there is definitely that feeling of, okay, it's harder to come up with fresher ideas that you haven't done before. So after that point, the producers brought in Richard Maybaum, who did the second draft, and brought in the solar energy subplot and sort of added that element in. And then Tom Mankiewicz was brought in to do the third and final draft. So I feel the issues really are, their ideas are brilliant throughout. There are brilliant ideas throughout this film, but there was not the necessary time to really polish these two different writing tonalities, as they had done on Diamonds Are Forever, for example, which had been written by Richard Maybaum, and then Tom Mankiewicz came in and wrote another draft, and that they had time to finesse that script. And then Tom Mankiewicz wrote Live and Let Die solo, and so Richard Maybaum is now coming back in, and he has his own established viewpoint of Bond, which is different in ways to Tom Mankiewicz's viewpoint, which again, anytime you have two different writers, there's always different viewpoints. So I feel Transamerica saying, hey, can we get a Bond film like super fast? That is really, and everyone admitted this, they just kind of rushed into it. And I think that's the quality people are picking up on, and it's not necessarily that the film is, quote unquote bad. Yes, there are a few little rough bits, and, yes, Sheriff J.W. Pepper was a popular character, but do we necessarily need to see him on vacation in Thailand? No, but it's funny enough, and it doesn't derail the film, and it doesn't go on for 45 minutes, so it's over and done with. And honestly, it's integrated into the film probably a lot better than when they would attempt the same thing, bringing Jaws back and Moonraker just a few years later at the end of the decade. And since it's right after Live and Let Die, it's also spherical. It has that sort of grittier, more realistic, lived-in feel that Live and Let Die had. So I've always really appreciated that. And the story is, while it's more globetrotting, it is actually still rather intimate and human-driven. Bond essentially thinks he's the target of the world's greatest assassin and has to find and eliminate this threat before he himself is killed. So there's no, on the surface, Queen and Country mission. But of course, the Solex agitator comes back into play. So that's always on the back burner. But again, because it's on the back burner, I think it's another sign of not having the time to really finesse the script drafts to get it really, really fully cohesive. All that stuff aside, the other issue is the fact that this was the last film co-produced by Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, and in that sense, it's really the last of an era, because Harry Saltzman was an integral part of the Bond series, and while he was known as the wild ideas man and being much harder to work with than Cubby Broccoli was, he was a great producer when he was, focusing on one film and not 10,000 other things. But he was a great producer, and he could come up with great ideas that simply nobody else would. And I think that spark of Harry Saltzman's, it was a key part of the Bond formula. And unfortunately, the relationship had soured to a point where they were alternating films who was the lead producer. So this was a Cubby Broccoli lead produced film. And because of that, and the Cubby films and the Harry films, I think you can notice a nice difference in tonality. So The Man with the Golden Gun is like Diamonds Are Forever and You Only Live Twice, in that it's globetrotting. You have more of the grandeur. You have some of the big, elaborate sets. The pacing is maybe a little bit more. It's not subdued, but it's a little more relaxed, and it's all, you have more of the lavish. Whereas the Harry Saltzman led films are, On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Live and Let Die, which are much more down-to-earth, gritty. The action is intense, and they feel different. And I think that's a very important distinction to make, and something that never gets mentioned. But of course, that's not to say that the other producer was not involved. It was just to try and salvage this partnership for as long as possible, it was, deemed the best thing to do was just, sort of take turns, so they weren't, constantly at each other's throats. And after this film, Harry Saltzman got into a series of different investments that didn't go well, and he had put up his shares of the Bond franchise as collateral, which was forbidden to do in their original partnership, and that, soured their relationship even further. And so it got to the point where the partnership broke up, and Saltzman eventually sold his shares to United Artists. So that tied the Bond series to a particular studio. And thus, once United Artists got swallowed up into the ongoing, never-ending MGM bankruptcy financial nightmare, that's caused all of the massive legal problems the Bond series has faced ever since. And it all goes back to Harry selling out to UA in 1975, when he was really up against, between a rock and a hard place financially. And it was sad that he did leave. And so that's why The Man with the Golden Gun, even though it's the 9th film in the series, it really marks a sort of touchstone. It's the end of an era in that sense, because it's the last film to have both the original partners on board. And Saltzman's spark is something that really it has never been recaptured. It's a particular element that's even here in The Man with the Golden Gun. So those are the two key factors I think that are important to understand, and how this film turned out the way it did. And instead of it being labeled the ultra 70s weird kung fu James Bond film, the Bond film trying to cash in on the kung fu craze, really spearheaded by the Bruce Lee films and exploding in the States once Enter the Dragon came out in 1973. Which, of course, the film does, and I'll talk about it as we go through, but it's like calling Live and Let Die a blaxploitation Bond film. It's really undercutting the creativity of the screenplay and the film itself and the direction. And Bond has, as a series, used things that were popular in the zeitgeist at the time many times over. Of course, the most famous being Moonraker being made in the post-Star Wars craze, because that being the title that had not been adapted yet with the most science fiction elements, and it was simply a smart thing to do. And I think all the kung fu elements are woven in well to the Eastern setting, and I also appreciate that the setting feels much more lived in, and like not exactly the full-on travelogue aspect that you get in, say, You Only Live Twice. So all that being said, that's my, as usual, overlong prologue out of the way. And so let's just go ahead and go to the film. So go ahead and get whichever version of the film you wish, and try and go ahead and cue it up to the sort of black frames in front of the gun barrel, so that way we can try and get a rough sync without all the different logos of the various versions, because it's going to be different if you're looking at Blu-ray versus an old DVD, or you're streaming it somehow or something. So it's not going to be exact, and of course these tracks are not professionally recorded, nor do I have notes, or I'm not reading an essay or something. I'm just literally spitballing whatever thoughts of the million thoughts that come into my head when I watch these films. But go ahead and cue up to the gun barrel sequence again. Just at the start of that, the black frames before you hear John Barry's music start. Also, do go ahead, if you're looking at a later version, go to the audio options and be sure to select the original mono audio track. This film, like all of the mono era films, has a really nasty 5.1 remix with replaced effects. And like Live and Let Die, this film has a really nice, punchy mono mix, so you don't lose anything at all by listening to the film's proper original audio track, and it's really well done for the era. It doesn't get the credit for that it deserves. It's a really well recorded mono track for 1974, very nice and punchy. So all that's out of the way. So let's go ahead and go to the film again. Try and cue it up to the few black frames between disc logos and the gun barrel. And then we'll do a countdown. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press play now. So we're here in the gun barrel, which of course is spherical, this being the last Bond film of the original series to be done spherically instead of anamorphically. And it's a reusing of the Live and Let Die gun barrel. Of course, this would be redone for The Spy Who Loved Me because that film was Roger's first in scope. So we open after this nice John Barry rendering of the James Bond theme into this extremely atmospheric pre-title sequence, which sets up our villain and the funhouse and Scaramanga's Island, his lair. We get to see Nick Nack and Andrea Anders for the first time. And of course, much like in Live and Let Die, this is a sequence that does not feature James Bond, but instead goes more for setting up the atmosphere of the film and does so beautifully. And when you look at this sequence closely enough, people complain James Bond isn't in it. There's not some mini adventure, but the pre-titles started that way. When you look at From Russia with Love, where they came up with the concept of the pre-title, it's all about atmosphere because the man we think is James Bond is of course not, and it's a Spectre training exercise. If you look at this sequence more closely, you will actually realize that the whole notion of the From Russia with Love pre-title being a training exercise, well, this is a training exercise, so it has that direct link to it being From Russia with Love. Now, of course, this is Mark Lawrence here playing a character called Rodney, but it's often wondered in fan circles if it's the same character he played in Diamonds Are Forever. But here he's playing a gangster who, ostensibly at first, has been hired by Nick Nack to kill his boss, but of course it's simply a ruse because this is Scaramanga's over-elaborate way of keeping his eye sharp, as it were. And everything in this film seems simple, but is far more richly detailed. Now, I have to mention here, you see this beautiful, highly detailed set, and there are great sets throughout this film. The production design was by Peter Merton, who had worked under Ken Adam for a number of years on several Bonds and Dr. Strangelove, and when Ken Adam was unavailable, and I believe Sid Cain was as well, who had done the Bonds that Ken Adam hadn't done. Basically, he got the call to promoted up the ladder, as it were. And I mean, his set design in this film, it's frequently richly detailed, and Scaramanga's Island and the funhouse and the solar reactor set that we see in the climax, along with the set of the sunken Queen Elizabeth. I mean, they're just some of the greatest sets in film history, particularly that Queen Elizabeth set, which I'll talk about more when we get to that. But he's definitely often underrated because everybody talks about Ken Adam. They rarely mention Sid Cain, and they never mention Peter Merton, let alone Peter Lamont. But again, it's nice in this pre-title we're allowed this sequence builds, and it definitely sets up the more relaxed pacing of the film compared to Live and Let Die. It adds a nice richness that really, I think, gets magnified by Christopher Lee's performance as Scaramanga, and he's just magnificent in every frame of this film, and it's always a shame when Scaramanga has to be killed because he's so likable, but it's a nice mirror reflection of what Bond could be, which they play up very well in the dialogue scene at the sort of lunch table before the duel. But this is Christopher Lee really relishing, getting out of the Hammer horrors, getting out of his typecasting. And while I haven't seen every single Christopher Lee film, because he has literally one of the most exhaustive filmographies of any actor in motion picture history, of all the films I've seen, and I adore his performances in everything, even when the films are terrible, but I find it very difficult to find a role where his joy of acting is more visible than it is here. Maybe Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where he plays Mycroft, but this one in particular, and he always said that Guy Hamilton in this film was the man who got the Dracula out of me, which I think you can feel that joy of performance throughout the film. So here we are introduced with Rodney, the ill-fated gangster. He is manipulated by Nick Nack, who is making it as difficult as possible to go through this funhouse. But in doing this, we're allowed to see the funhouse, which allows us to be primed for the climax when we know Bond will find himself in this, maze of tricks. And this is fun with the first mannequin and the Wild West saloon. If you look very closely, you'll notice the face is a little familiar because, of course, it looks exactly like Roger Moore with a mustache on. And all of this is done with just like the nice bit of tongue-in-cheekness. So when Rodney looks around, he has that slight look of, you can't be quite serious. And it's interesting that it's all of these different depictions of things throughout history that involve guns somehow, because of course Scaramanga is obsessed with weaponry. And I love the gag here that, of course, ostensibly these guns are firing real bullets, and when Rodney fires, the line, "Hey, Al, wherever you are, don't hold it against me," as if he actually knew Al Capone or knew of him or something. So it's a nice human touch for a character that's going to be gone in about a minute or so. And again, this byplay between Scaramanga and Knick-Knack, as later said, "You'll be the death of me yet." It's beautiful. You can tell they have this actual relationship, and of course, the idea being that Scaramanga, although he's very elegant, he's an outsider character, and so is Knick-Knack, and they are both sort of outcasts from society, and they're living on this remote island together, and thus they're sort of birds of a feather in that way, which of course harkens back to how Tom Mankiewicz wrote Wint and Kid in Diamonds Are Forever. Again, this whole sequence is deliciously put together. It establishes the certain tone of humor that we're going to see throughout the film, and it's all telling important story and setting us up for what we're going to see in the climax, and of course setting up Scaramanga as the great villain, and also he's a bit of a trickster, and he's not always he always has something up his sleeve, as we see here with the trick stares. So he's not fighting fair. He never does, and that sets us up for every time that Scaramanga gets the drop on Bond. Bond has to be extra cautious, because not only is this the world's greatest assassin, he doesn't play by the rules. And that actually was something that was an important part of the final duel that was unfortunately removed in the editing process. And you could see it in part of the original trailer, but that's a theme we see throughout the film. This, of course, is the nice little shock moment where we see the supposed mannequin of Bond, but of course in a lot of the close-ups, it is of course the Roger himself, or with the previous mannequins, they're just standing very, very still. But this sets up that Scaramanga, essentially hero worships Bond, and why he would know of 007. Not to mention, of course, the delicious part of the climax where Bond himself takes the place of the mannequin. Of course, the missed bullet, why would Scaramanga miss? Well, the idea being that, perhaps since the camera goes close in on Bond's face, that he shot him in the groin. And with that, we go into the pre-titles as the beautiful face beckons us in to Lulu's title song. I do feel this title song, and particularly Maurice Bender's title sequence, is really underrated. Yes, they're both a bit on the raunchy side, but the film is. They really reflect, again, of course, reflect through the rippling water effects, which are beautifully done. The sort of roughshod, slightly raunchy quality that the Man with the Golden Gun represents. And that's something that it seems is a bit, definitely a bit off-putting to most audiences, but there's something delicious about it that I love. It is a bit rough around the edges, and I love it for it. It would be an extraordinarily long time until we got any film that had Bond much more on a human level, and really that wouldn't come until the 80s when the films got more serious, and I would say probably we wouldn't get more of this grittiness until really the darker parts of A View to a Kill, and then The Living Daylights. Of course, most of the same cast and crew continues over. Two of the editors from Live and Let Die edited on this film. Of course, it's still taking multiple editors to take the place of Peter Hunt. But the big changeover being that Ted Moore started out on the film but fell ill and had to be replaced by Oswald Morris, another phenomenal, legendary cinematographer in his own right. But that means this film, while it is also spherical, like Live and Let Die, it definitely... it has a different feel. I like that Ozzy Morris, as he was usually referred to, brings almost like a slight golden cast to the look of the film. I've always felt maybe that was intended because, of course, the title, but it's definitely not as vibrant as Live and Let Die, but it's more sedate, but that befits the tone and everything. again, the raunchiness of the film comes up in the very obvious, near saying of nudity in the titles. But again, I think it really fits. And then the credits go right over where the nipple would be, of course, and then we go bang, 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 right into the M office scene, which is a really interesting, almost slightly jarring jump. We cut the opening banter with Moneypenny. We go right to Bond coming through the leather doors. So it does give a nice freshness, but it can be considered a bit jarring. But I like that they were still trying to do something different. Of course, here we're getting the establishment of the MI6 dossier on Francisco Scaramanga, but of course, since Bond is, of course, the know-it-all in the films, he can literally recite the entire dossier summary, with perfect recall. And it maybe is a little bit much that Bond would know the exact file, but of course, he probably would know at least the general summary of ostensibly the most dangerous man in the world. Most people overlook the fact that part of the summary, not only does it talk about the only identifying mark is his third nipple, but he was trained by the KGB until he went solo. He takes $1 million per contract. So it is important information, and it is plausible enough that Bond would know this. Now here is where the film gets completely brilliant. The conceit of the plot, what gets Bond and MI6 drawn into this, is the sending of the golden bullet to, sort of psych out Bond, as it were, that he is the next target of the man with the golden gun, a man no one has ever seen. And this causes Bond to be removed from his assignment, and he's supposed to go to ground, but he decides, and in a nice bit of back and forth with M, that if I found him first, sir, that might change things dramatically. And of course, we get the beautiful line, who would pay $1 million to have me killed? Jealous husbands, outraged chefs, humiliated tailors, the list is endless. And the present assignment is, of course, about the energy crisis and the disappearance of the expert Gibson and the Solix agitator. So this is the Richard Maybaum, sort of global crisis that he brought into the writing. Originally, Tom Mankiewicz wrote his first draft, and it was all about the duel between Bond and Scaramanga. He had it much more patterned. He always said his idea was to make it much more like a classic Western, and his idea was it was like the classic Western Shane. And so he actually wrote it with Jack Palance in mind, and they did go to Jack Palance, who turned it down. But obviously when they cast Christopher Lee, the part was more tailored for him. But the original concept was much more the mano-a-mano duel that we see at the climax. But it was a different conception in the first Tom Mankiewicz script, and I would love to be able to read these different drafts at some point, but the general idea is that Maybaum felt, which he also said about Live and Let Die when he finally saw it, he felt there wasn't enough high stakes in the story, and I feel had they had more time, once again, they would have been able to perfectly finesse these differing script ideas and really get them condensed together and to be much more cohesive. Because there's a lot of elements in this film that most people overlook or don't watch carefully, and particularly it's the subplots about the energy crisis, and also, I think most of all, is Bond's character throughout the film, because Roger's performance is really underrated here. He's cold and hard, as Guy Hamilton directed him to be, and got that element in Live and Let Die, but here Bond is absolutely, without question, pissed off. He is fighting for his life, at least for the first half of the film, as we're led to believe. But he's also on his guard. He has to find Scaramanga before Scaramanga, hops up and puts a bullet in him. And he's pissed at being taken off his assignment and being threatened in this way. So he has this nastiness throughout that really goes with the slight raunchiness of the film, and that grittiness, that rough around the edges quality. And that's something I've always found very interesting. And people always write Roger off as being, too princely to play Bond, that he wasn't rough or tough enough. And I think the first two Guy Hamilton films certainly disprove that. But, he has dark moments in Live and Let Die, but he has this wonderful nastiness throughout The Man with the Golden Gun, which is not exactly something Roger enjoyed doing in particular instances, most notably in the scene with Andrea Anders, which I'll talk to when we get to that scene. But he can play these scenes really well, and he does so perfectly. But it's an interesting blend, again, because you have the two writers. So you have the Richard Maybaum innate Bond knowledge. I mean, Richard Maybaum could probably in his sleep write a phenomenal Bond screenplay by this point, without question. But you also have the Tom Mankiewicz wit and the Tom Mankiewicz sort of satirical edge, twisting things on its head a little bit. And it's also refined further because this, of course, was the third film in the series he was working on. So while I do feel maybe some sections, maybe again they go a bit on the raunchy side, they're little less polished because they literally ran into this film and everybody was feeling burned out, and that's why Tom Mankiewicz left after his first draft and then had to come back to do a third draft. Despite all of that, I think it has some of his best writing, particularly in the one-liners. It has some of his absolute most genius writing work, and the film, it's about time the film is looked at critically and seriously to examine its, for, I guess if you want to say, pun intended, its golden nuggets, which it has many. And of course, this scene in the original concept, Bond is having to trace the only known, victim of Scaramanga, where he could perhaps get some information and retrieve this golden bullet to have it analyzed. Again, Bond is using his detective skills, his intelligence gathering skills here. And the original concept in Mankiewicz's version was that Bond would essentially have to charm it out of this morbidly, not necessarily ugly, but definitely not the type of, lady friend that Bond would, take to bed. And that was the gag. And the reason why there's a fight in this sequence is originally they were being secretly filmed and recorded a la From Russia with Love and the bridal scene. But when it was changed to a much different type of character for the actress to play, we still have the fight sequence, and I've always wondered, well, why do these guys come in? Well, I think it's because originally they were supposed to be being observed. And I do love the fact that Bond manages to get the bullet, and the gag of the fight and why he's so off balance at first is that he's fighting while practically choking to death. And this is a nice little fight that gets in nice close quarters. Of course, unfortunately, it's marred by the rather infamous flub now of when the mirror turns, you see the crew reflected. And unfortunately, you see it more than once. But you see there, Roger pounding the guy's head into the wall. Again, it's very close quarters. You see everybody's faces turning red. It's a nice visceral fight. You see some sweat on the faces, and all the items are getting used, topped off when Roger takes the. I don't know if I guess it is a bottle of Fabergé, but he takes it and he sprays it in the guy's face. So it's a nice. Again, it's rather rough. It's nice and visceral. We have the breaking of the bottle, and then finally the shattering of the mirror. So, again, for all those who claim that Roger's Bond was too soft, all I have to do, there are great scenes in Live and Let Die, but again, the nastiness on display in The Man with the Golden Gun, again, with Roger's unflappable charm, as shown here, Bond is bleeding a little bit at the lip. It's wonderful. He's been roughed up for sure. Not for where I'm standing. Just perfectly done. And I love that he comes out into this nice seedy alleyway when he gets into the cab. It's like, Hotel Mister? No, to the nearest pharmacy. Because, again, he's trying to keep the bullet from passing through his digestive system. And then we get this nice scene with the analysis of the bullet and some part of Q Branch, ostensibly we've never seen before. And this is the character of Calthorpe we saw earlier, who's, I guess, the analysis, analyst of MI6, and now we've brought in Q finally, who was noticeably absent in Live and Let Die. We get this nice back and forth where Bond is questioning the evidence and again using his intelligence to figure out the problem, And we get a nice bit of banter back and forth when Q is like, just because it's a 4.2 millimeter gun and that isn't made by any recognized manufacturer doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But it's edited pretty well. We get the nice cutaways to the explosion. We get some nice bits of humor throughout. So the scene moves, and we're finding out important information. This is, again, Bond following the trail of this actual bullet. Not that it is the bullet that was sent to them, but of course, it begs the question, why didn't they just examine the first bullet in the first place? And so my guess is that they had to match it somehow to this one that had already been fired because they couldn't get enough information out of the first one. I love this cutaway to the brick wall suddenly exploding. And then we get this wonderful, what the hell is Lazar? And then chap who made the bullet 007, and then this beautiful transition to Macau for the first time, which of course with the neon signs immediately makes you think of You Only Live Twice and our first view of Tokyo when Bond arrives at night. But again, Bond is in this rickshaw here, and John Barry's score is much more intimate. And I've always loved that all the location work in this film is much more lived in and intimate. So also, Bond is getting to his destination far quicker than he does in You Only Live Twice, getting to the sumo wrestling match. And I love the fact that these people are eating their dinner and they're just totally quiet, and Bond just shows up. So there's nice little indirect humor, but it's immediately undercut by suspense, where we first see Lazar through the curtains. And this is Lazar, the maker of the golden bullets and perhaps ostensibly the golden gun itself. And, of course, he's played by Martin Maitland, who is a very familiar face if you've seen a lot of British films. He did a number of classic Hammer films, and is just a wonderful character actor. And he gives a fantastic performance here. It's a shame he's not in the film more. But this scene with Lazar in this wonderfully designed little gun shop for, special order items only, and the display of the gun made for a gunman who just lost 2 fingers, and there's no trigger, and it's extraordinarily inventive. But the whole scene has this dark tone, this great edge, and again, some of Tom Mankiewicz's best ever dialogue. And Roger plays it beautifully and with this really dark edge. So this is one of those scenes I always point to. People say, "Oh, well, Roger Moore raised his eyebrows and had all the gadgets and stuff," and then I play this scene for people who have either not seen this film or don't take it seriously. And, it's just, it builds suspense beautifully, and it plays out. The camera tracks around with the actors, and the whole scene, the whole setup of this character is fascinating. And again, the production design, he has the little card file catalogs. You have to wonder what kind of crazy weapons he's made for all these people through the years, and that he's a known manufacturer to Q Branch. They know that this guy makes all these crazy weapons, and it's highly inventive, very specialized. And of course, Lazar should know by this point, it was a mistake to have a fully 360-degree rotating gun mount. The gleam of joy in Roger's eye when he turns the gun around and then "Speak of forever hold your peace." I mean, he's not going to shoot Lazar, but you also know that he easily could. And then you notice that Lazar's voice starts to raise, he starts to get more panicked, and then he starts to raise up and about an inch or two, and Bond actually fires an inch too low, which of course Bond knew. Which, you know that Bond is not actually going to shoot him, but it's that dark edge, and he easily could. But it's the darkness of the threat and the coldness with which Bond plays it. And then I've always loved this transition here. We go to the disguise of where the bullets are hidden, and then Bond slides them out, so you get a nice view, and then we immediately cut to how Lazar is, told to dump them. And again, very intelligently done in the casino setting, where they're able to transfer it up different levels, and he gets his payoff. And then Bond is lying in wait to observe who picks it up. And of course, it's not Scaramanga, but his, agent, as it were. And now we're reintroduced to Andrea Anders, and Bond will follow her. And again, still following the trail of the golden bullet, as if his life depended on it, because as far as we know at this point, it does. And of course, the crew had fun at the casino in between shots, as they did in Vegas on Diamonds Are Forever. And here we get the nice ferry, which, like the hovercraft and Diamonds Are Forever bringing us to Amsterdam, gives us a nice bit of scenery and introducing us to the locale. And something interesting in this sequence, if you've looked at it on older versions, there was a strobing effect on Roger Moore's face where the light and the movement of the boat and the film and the camera caused this weird sort of light strobing effect. And that was something Lowry Digital took out when they did the Ultimate Edition DVD, and that's why it's also not present on the Blu-ray. But I've seen the film so many times I miss it not being there because they removed that digitally. Now we get to see the wreck of the Queen Elizabeth, which I always thought as a kid I could go see that, but of course it was removed shortly thereafter the film was made, and that's setting up for all of us who didn't know it was there. How that becomes the MI6 secret headquarters later on when Bond is brought there. So here again we see Bond as detective. He's following Andrea Anders as she gets into the green Rolls Royce, and he goes to get into the taxi and. Our man in town, Mary Goodnight, is unfortunately late, and now we're introduced to the official Bond girl of the film, and of course a character from Fleming's novel, but completely recharacterized as the long-suffering, very ditzy in ways, lady friend of Bond's, who has unfortunately the gag, of course, is that they have never quite consummated their relationship, and it's a source of eternal frustration for her. When she's first introduced, the ditziness that really goes into overdrive throughout the rest of the film isn't as apparent, and it's an interesting idea. It's something we hadn't seen before. You get a little bit of that with the Tiffany Case character in the final act of Diamonds Are Forever, but it's fine enough, and Britt Eklund does what she can with the role, but there are times where it is definitely a bit, you don't quite groan at some of the dumb stuff, but it's like, okay, I get it. But it's the interplay she has with Roger is really nice. So again, it's interesting that the supposed great liaison officer is actually very klutzy, and Bond has to suffer through it. I've always loved this extra and the way that he opens the door and he's like, "I open champagne now? No, it's a surprise." And oh, a surprise! I've always loved the way he says that. I still to this day, if somebody says it's a surprise, I find myself doing that. Now, this is a wonderful, suspenseful moment, and John Barry's score really sells that, along with this magnificent hotel room set that Peter Merton designed. John Barry felt that this was his least favorite of his 11 Bond scores. He said that, he really had only a couple weeks to compose, write, record, orchestrate, and, finish the entire score. But I really think he does himself a disservice. I think it's also the point at which you can see him transitioning his styles, because he started out with a very brassy style, and then in his late career had a string-based style that's much more romanticized. And I think in his Bond scores, this is the point where you see that transition, and it is just gorgeously atmospheric throughout. I mean, it's a phenomenal score. And then Roger, with absolute effortlessness, confronts her in the shower, and you get some, as Bond says later, some titillating moments reflected through the glass, but you don't actually see anything. And Bond appears completely nonplussed, and I love the way that Roger does this completely without any sort of, antagonism at first. And here we get the nice cutaway to the mirror, which we actually see after his reaction, and seeing the woman dressing or undressing in the mirror surreptitiously goes all the way back to Hitchcock. And, of course, Spielberg would use it in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, here's the second part of the scene. This is the scene everybody likes to bring up. This is a scene that Roger Moore felt was too far, and even when they shot this, he really didn't feel that he should be, seen to be roughing up a woman. And this was something that Guy Hamilton insisted on that had to be in here. And you if you really want to read into it, you can tell that, maybe Roger's a bit uncomfortable with this. But what most people fail to take into account is at this point, Bond is really up against it, and this is his only lead. Although, you'd think he could have gotten this information without being this completely rough. But again, in this film, Bond is really pissed off, and he's having to go all the way out to the Far East, and he's having to figure out who this guy is and where he is before he pops up and puts a bullet in him. And, he's the most dangerous man in the world, and the clock is ticking. Again, I think a problem of the script not getting that nice finesse between all the drafts is that idea of the ticking clock and the importance of this, and Bond finding Scaramanga before Scaramanga kills him is not as prevalent. And unless you're really paying attention and trying to suck up every detail like I do with these films, it's very easy to miss why Roger seems so standoffish and like angry throughout. But again, you can sense a certain desperation. There's a reason why he's doing this. And again, some of the dialogue in this scene, when Andre has to describe Scaramanga, and he's not like other people. He has 3 fascinating anatomical tidbit, but the most useless piece of information I ever heard. Unless the bottom's up is, of course, a strip club, and Scaramanga's performing there. It's just beautiful. And Roger delivers it with such an edge in his voice. And then he grabs her by the scruff of the terry cloth robe, But even in this scene, you can see that Andrea is not her own woman, that, she is a kept woman and she feels trapped. We don't get this spelled out at first. And that makes the overall scene, much darker. And, you know that she's a woman in trouble. So it definitely makes Bond being so cold and roughing her up a bit feel like way too much. But again, look at the way that Roger sits there and is like, you have to do this, and if you don't, he may not show up the bottoms up, and I want him there. And then, of course, if you don't play your part right, who knows? He may even use one of those golden bullets on you. And that would be a pity, because they're very expensive. So he's still threatening her with her own life. And even her, Scaramanga, knowing that she even encountered Bond means her probable doom. So she's screwed either way. And then we get this beautiful, raunchy close-up smash cut with this wonderful lounge music with the fuzz guitar on the lovely lass serving drinks at the Bottoms Up Club. And this is apparently a set that they built. They went outside the Bottoms Up, but they didn't actually shoot inside it. It's just a wonderful real-world location with just a wonderful name that actually did exist. So I just find it so wonderful they used it. And I watched this film, religiously as a kid. So it was always fun when people would walk in the room right as that scene came up on like a rear projection TV. I remember that vividly happening once, and my poor grandmother almost having a heart attack. And I would just like sit down, enjoy, it's magic. And this is a wonderful scene that is very suspenseful, but we get this cutaway to Scaramanga making love to Andrea, and this, of course, as Bond says later, bullfighters do the same thing, claims it improves the eye, only making love before the event, in Scaramanga's case, before the kill. We get our first glimpse of the beautiful brown set of the bedroom in Scaramanga's junk, and gorgeous John Barry music. And I've always loved the background music here where Bond is waiting outside the electronics store window, and using the old display type where they would put the TVs out and you could look at yourself on camera to actually show off the reappearance of Knick Knack. And Bond recognizing what a strange character. And he has this nice acknowledgement of Bond and the wonderful addition of the bowler hat. He walks off. The music immediately gets suspenseful, and Bond knows something is up, throws away the cigar, and then you see Scaramanga above. Of course, and he got to his firing position quite quickly from the bedroom on the junk, but A little dramatic license. Beautiful build up with the close up going down. You see the eye, and then we focus in on the barrel of the gun, the nice slight glint on the gold. And then you think he's going to shoot Bond until the very last moment. He shoots, as Bond says later, the chap coming out of the Bottoms Up Club just over Bond's shoulder. So this is the point where the film takes a left turn. Now, Scaramanga could have killed Bond, and we find out Scaramanga did not have a contract on Bond because he shoots the other guy, who we don't know is, of course, Gibson, the missing agent, a scientist that Bond was after in the first place. And we don't know that this is Lieutenant Hip, and we don't know that Knick-Knack has stolen the Solex out of his pocket. And, of course, you would think that Lieutenant Hip's first thing would have been to grab the all-important Solex agitator out of the dead man's pocket. But, he also says that he looked in the body, but we don't see him do that at any point. So it's interesting. I've always thought that was weird because he looks at him at first, but ostensibly we're led to believe that Knick-Knack steals it. But anyway, that's a minor thing. But it's a nice bit of sleight of hand, and we get this wonderful suspenseful build-up with the John Barry Q getting to the boat, and Bond's being led off, and the idea is that he's been captured somehow by the opposition, posing as police. Again, I think it really should be noted how this follows Live and Let Die in that it's very lived in. We feel like we're really there because it is a real location. And I think that Ozzie Morris and his photography, while, again, it's not what Ted Moore would have done, he's following what Ted Moore set, that precedent. And, Morris said that, Cubby Broccoli told him that, Bond films had to be clearly photographed, well lit, without a lot of trickery. And so Morris came in, ostensibly he was a hired gun because they had already started production when Ted Moore fell ill. And so, but what he does very clean, very beautifully composed work and allows this very luscious natural quality to come across, which I've always felt is so wonderful. This is one of the great scenes of the film where Scaramanga comes back and he pulls his golden gun. If you look at Lee's face, he starts to run it up and down Andrea's naked body. And it's apparently something that he does all the time. You see how distant she becomes. The music gets darker, and then this close-up of Lee's face when his face goes colder and he starts running the barrel over her face and her mouth. It's almost as if, he saw Bond at the Bottoms Up and he now maybe suspects that something is going on. And when he sees Andrea flinch, he knows that she's hiding something from him, which I think is where the first doubts appear in his mind. And all of this is in a single close-up. It's a very, very minor, and I'm reading all kinds of stuff in it, but it's a beautiful little scene, so well directed and performed. And obviously the gun is meant to be extraordinarily phallic, so it's also very sexual as well. Again, with this John Barry cue, this whole sequence is ridiculously suspenseful, and the boat's going off into the night, and Hip is just sitting back there, and although it's really revealed in a second not to be anything, Bond doesn't know where he's headed, and so when he makes his break for it, he's ostensibly doing it to save his own skin, and he sees the wreck of the liner, and I guess his idea is to jump on it and somehow find transportation back to the shore. And then I love how everybody just sort of freezes, and we get this wonderful intercom, "Welcome aboard, Commander." And then the hatchway opens, and everyone in the audience is like, no, it can't be. There's no way. And seeing this tilt, and of course seeing the ship being on its side as it sunk, this sets up the whole magical set that we are introduced to here. So this is the Queen Elizabeth set I referred to earlier. This is one of the most intricately designed, beautiful sets I have ever seen in any film, and no one talks about it. The entire set is designed on a tilt. All the chairs have little straps so they can stay buckled in. You have this bar. Again, it's a converted ocean liner. So I guess you maybe think of the Poseidon Adventure once the wave flips the boat upside down. But of course, it's been conformed to MI6's headquarters, and you have to think, why in the world would anyone go to this trouble? And it's explained in that throwaway bit of dialogue, it's the only place in Hong Kong you can't possibly be bugged by the Americans or the Chinese, and it's very practical because the rent is so high in Hong Kong. So just a single beautiful bit of throwaway dialogue explains this intricate, beautiful, stunning set that thankfully we get nice cutbacks to every time Bond has to make reports or go back to M. And where I said that Bond's character here is definitely very pissed off and is very, miffed and angry. M, as played by Bernard Lee, is at his absolute crustiest here. He even says, I almost wish Scaramanga had a contract on you. I mean, if Bond is pissed off, from this point onward, M is literally furious until the end credits. And it's really wonderful to see just how crusty M can get. This is M at his crustiest. And of course, this whole notion of the mission now being a complete foul-up is why Bond and Lieutenant Hip find themselves working together, and why M says, after this debacle, it's good. You'll need. I'm ordering you to have a good liaison officer to make sure the work is perfectly done. And so, who do we have? Okay, well, you're going to work with Goodnight because she does things by the book, and you can see the look on Bond's face. Goodnight, sir. And we have a bit of dialogue about the importance of the Solex, and Q getting to have extra bits of scientific dialogue that eventually, M is just like, oh, shut up, Q. But this is the fun bit, where the scientist is like, may I see it, please? And then Lieutenant Hip looks so crestfallen. He showed it to me, put it in his pocket, and then it wasn't there once he was dead. And you could just see everyone's faces fall. Everyone is just totally bummed out. And of course, Bond walked into all of this, and all of this happened after he was removed from the assignment, so he would have had no idea he was following the trail of Scaramanga. But it's not a complete foul-up because, of course, Bond realizes that there is a potential lead because whoever paid for Gibson's assassination is at least a multimillionaire. And they're able to make the conclusion, logically, that Gibson had probably been working for high-fat industries, and that would most likely be the candidate of the multimillionaire who would have the disposable money and reason to have Gibson eliminated. And since no one knows Scaramanga and no one knows his appearance, which has been set up by the initial scene, Bond here realizes that he can try and pose as Scaramanga and go to High Fat and see if he can get any information out of him, which is a brilliant deduction. This whole little bit of intelligence is well done, but it's something that's so quick and kind of gets glossed over that people don't really notice it. And now, of course, they've been given the news they're going to be saddled with Goodnight for the rest of the movie. And I like that Hip immediately tells Bond, I drive by High Fat's place all the time. There's guards everywhere. Again, there's a nice bit of humanity to Lieutenant Hip. You get to know him as a person. Of course, we see him having to drive his nieces around. So again, it's a nice bit of a third dimension of humanity to these characters that I've always loved and appreciated. And Tom Mankiewicz especially seemed to try and find little gags and things like that to make not just the set pieces, but a lot of these side characters more believable, more fleshed out, which I've always enjoyed. And here they're spying on High Fat, and they're doing the old gag of having to stand on each other's shoulders. And we cut to Bond, who's just puffing away at a cigar while somebody's standing on his shoulders instead of straining or anything at all. And Lieutenant Hip says, there's no way at all, guards everywhere. John Barry starts to layer in the notes of the Bond theme. I'm sure he'll see me, and Bond just climbs in anyway. And of course, the gag is going to be here that He will identify himself as Scaramanga by wearing the false third nipple, because that is the only identifying mark of Scaramanga. And of course, he's having to play act, and you see Roger do a role within a role. He's playing Bond, playing a reading of the Scaramanga character from the dossier, trying to get information out of High Fat. So it's a nice character within a character. This is the wonderfully named Chew Me, which I have to think is probably a Mankiewicz name because it's just so beautifully silly. And of course, Bond would go into this, guarded fortress, and there would be a beautiful naked woman in the swimming pool. And I guess the pool is an excuse for why Bond would just take off his shirt to just show off the extra nipple as his calling card. And I love how Bond just simply, does that little glance down. You see Roger, just nonchalantly, And then immediately send the guards away. Forgive me, Mr. Scaramanga. This is a wonderful scene between Bond and High Fat because, again, Bond is play acting. He's using a very important core skill that that the films don't get enough credit for, when Bond has to go undercover and really sell it. And it's really something you see Roger do a number of times. Of course, here, it's really only this one scene, but also all his scenes with Scaramanga, he is trying to psychologically prod Scaramanga into making mistakes and things. So, and of course, with his anger at being lured into all of this and his life being ostensibly threatened, again, sets him up as being pissed off throughout the whole film. And you get the fun bit of Bond having to talk about himself, but in character. Now, of course, High Fat as a name is, oh God, while it does sound silly at first, it's absolutely inspired, I think. And originally the idea is that there were going to be two, and there were going to be brothers, and you had High Fat and you had Low Fat. And as much as I love that idea as a joke and a gag, I think it's beautiful. I think having both of them probably would have been too much. I think just having High Fat and just not really going into that, and it being one of those things that until you notice it, and when you do, it's hysterical. I've always loved the extra here, that sort of withering glance he gives Bond as Bond goes out. That, of course, gives you a hint that, perhaps they're not exactly buying his charade. And, of course, Bond removes the nipple, and you have to wonder, well, wouldn't you keep that a little while longer? But, of course, he found me quite titillating, and like all Q gadgets, he doesn't have any respect for him. But here, again, we have the nice turn. Scaramanga is revealed, watching Bond through a pair of binoculars with this wonderful smile. So already we know Bond is in over his head. He's maneuvered himself into this position where he's going to be walking into a trap. And we know now that Scaramanga's plan is much more detailed because he's directly affiliated with High Fat, because he's literally there. And High Fat knows who he is, so he's not an assassin for hire. He's directly involved for some nefarious reasons we don't know yet. And it's a wonderful reveal that once again amps up the danger and the tension, because now we know Bond is walking into a trap. And here in this banter, if you look at it really closely, of course, you can tell there's been this long-standing thing between Bond and Goodnight. And once again, Bond goes away with the promise of, we'll have fun later. And Goodnight, obviously gets very angry. But with her ditziness in the rest of the film, I've always been surprised she doesn't just walk smack into the automatic doors. I'm thankful they didn't go that level of goofy. But again, now here we see Hip's niece is in the back, and he's grinning. High Fat's place is on the way. I'll drop you off, and I got to take them for like my sister or something. It's just a really funny idea that Bond's ally has to go drop his nieces off somewhere and then come back to make sure that Bond doesn't get killed or something and be his backup. It's a beautifully ludicrous idea, and it's so blink and you miss it. If you look at Roger's face, as soon as the gate is opened, I've always felt like he has this sort of weird look on his face, because he just has this like ruddiness in his face and his eyes. It's just always looked a little strange to me. But of course, I've seen this film thousands of times, so we're introduced here to Grizzly Land, as Bond says, with all of these strange figures. But mirroring Scaramanga's funhouse, we see all of these figures, and then mirroring what Bond will do in the climax, one of them actually starts to move. And of course, this is Knick Knack. And again, the whole notion of the mannequins and the real life people taking their place is seen here with the sumo wrestlers that we saw before as, not so convincing statues be, the real thing. And again, Bond will use this to his advantage in the climax. And it's a nice, very delicious turning of the tables because we've seen this trick before and they almost completely are able to kill Bond. And of course, getting out of the grip of a sumo wrestler having you in a bear hug, as silly as this sequence ends, you have to think this is not a good position to be in. It's like, how can Bond get out of this? And while the manner of twisting the article of clothing is, maybe it obviously done for laughs, it's definitely, like probably the only thing anybody could maybe think of. And I love the fact that Bond is knocked out by Knick Knack. And of course, this is the almost obligatory scene where why don't they just go ahead and kill Bond? But here they at least have a reason. High Fat appears and is like, I don't want this happening at my house. You're not going to kill some guy. Take him to the place where I have people get killed all the time. I'm not going to have it happen in my beautiful little garden. This is my house. Go do your killing somewhere else, dang it. And I love how Knick Knack is so disappointed. He just angrily throws the trident down. He's like, oh. And here's a wonderful touch. Bond here is regaining consciousness. He's being attended to by these women, and his eyes haven't opened yet, and he thinks that he's dead. And he says, heaven, definitely heaven, which probably an allusion to Goldfinger, where Bond thinks he's in heaven, and the first thing he sees is and hears is, my name is Pussy Galore, and says, I must be dreaming, so... And then says, I thought I'd wake up dead when he'd been hit with the tranquilizer gun. So that's sort of similar, but it's a beautiful little moment that most people overlook. And this transitions us into the karate school or kung fu school or whatever you want to call it. And Bond's in robes and things. This is the film's primary concession to what had become a sort of kung fu craze, again, that really erupted in the U.S. Bruce Lee had done a number of films, but Enter the Dragon came out in 1973, and that had a U.S. studio, Warner Brothers, behind it, and it was a massive success. So Bond is reflecting that, but he is in the Far East anyway, and it is perfectly believable that for some reason or other, High Fat would have a really, underground kung fu fighting school where, they're just killing each other left and right. Why he has this is unexplained. I don't know why an industrialist would have a fighting school like this, but he does. And so Bond finds himself there, and this is the method of which he's going to be dispatched. And, the idea is that he's going to be torn apart by these experts in the fighting arts. And we do get a variety of styles and things, and we get to see first this duel by sword, where we will see, the loser actually lose his life as well. So this is setting up the fact that, Bond is going to be obviously called onto the mat, but he's going to have to fight for his life because they're literally going to kill him. So that it's setting the stakes for this. He's not just watching a martial arts display because they were like, "Ooh, we want to have some kung fu fight scenes." And then Toshman here will go through his whole routine, and we will have to be left wondering, well, Bond is not a martial artist. How exactly is he going to defeat not just this one guy, but all of them? And the attendants come up, and they're like, okay. And then the beautiful moment when Toshman finishes, and all the ladies just turn out and beckon Bond to go out to, face obviously this entire crew of martial artists. And they're just like... And they don't say anything, but they have those wonderful smiles, and they take his teacup away, and they're like, it is now your turn. And then everybody's heads turn. So there is wonderful, nice inherent humor here still. We see Chula in a nice close-up. We get this he has this look of bemusement and also interest. What can this, Englishman do? And Bond is just thumbing his nose at the whole thing. He gives the slight bow of the head, and then he kicks Tosman in the face, and then bows as a complete middle finger to this whole thing. And he goes to walk off, and the head instructor is just like, and calls Chula. So, ostensibly to humiliate Bond, using the star of the Academy, everyone starts taunting and shouting his name. And again, he has this wonderful bemusement on his face. And I love when they bow, he maintains eye contact, so Bond cannot repeat the same kick to the face. And then Bond tries to maybe do another gag with the handshake. Now, of course, like a lot of kung fu films, they do sort of, on all the punches and kicks, they have the little, like, sort of breaking board sound effect a little, but it helps sell the impacts. And this is a nicely done little fight sequence, and it's wonderful to see Roger really throw himself into what is, a full-on martial arts sequence, because none of the other Bond actors have had to do this, and I know a lot of people like to criticize Roger as not necessarily being the most physically active in the fight scenes, but again, he's really going for it, and, he throws himself into the whole sequence, and that is to be commended. And the fight really works, and you can believe that Bond barely survives and manages to escape by not doing martial arts and throwing a straight punch to Chula's face. And then that beautiful shot when he crashes through the little thatched window. It almost looks in slow motion because it's so beautifully positioned, Bond's form coming through. And then Hip shows up and it's like, how'd you find me? Hi Fight owns this place. Now, a lot of people say this scene is a little too comical, but I have always adored the fact that Bond tries to protect the nieces of Hip, and then they just take charge and totally lay waste to all of these guys. And you're like, how in the world? And then Hip has the wonderful line of, forgot to tell you, their father runs a karate school. And John Barry perfectly finds the right note with, it's not quite full-on comical, but it has just that element of the lovingly slightly ridiculous. It's just enough. And then we get to the last guy, and then I love the fact that they hit him a few more times, and then Bond is like brought up to judge, and then just doesn't even punch him, just shoves him to the ground, and then they just walk off. And again, here it's that nice moment of everybody could charge out right now, but they just stare, and then they start to run off. And now the action cue comes back in because this will set up the chase sequence where they'll get onto the klongs on water. I should say on boats. And now a lot of people criticize this, but this is just, maybe it is a bit much that Hip would pull off and forget to get Bond, who he just spent the whole past 10 minutes attempting to rescue. But, in the heat of the moment, he takes off so fast, he leaves Bond. So it's plausible enough. It is funny in that way, but, it is a bit much. But it's just to get Bond onto the klong in this boat. And, of course, he pulls the prop screw out. Wonderful Mankiewicz line, what you might call a Mexican screw-off, gentlemen. And you would think, okay, the boat doesn't move that fast. The guys could maybe jump on there, but, you don't expect to run up into a boat propeller in your face. So it is a nice usage of that. And we get Roger Moore as Bond on a boat on the water again. So we immediately think of Live and Let Die. And this will be the scene in which we are reintroduced to Sheriff J.W. Pepper, who is, of course, on vacation in Bangkok. For some apparent reason, that's just where suppose his wife decided they had to go on vacation. And, of course, Pepper was a hugely popular part of Live and Let Die. And so, as I alluded to earlier, this is the same thing they would do with Jaws. He was very popular in Spy Who Loved Me, so they bring him back in Moonraker. Whereas in Moonraker, they do at least go to into detail of why he would come into the film. Here, Pepper is just there coincidentally. But again, his inclusion doesn't stop the film. It doesn't wreck anything, and it's just plausible enough that he would just happen to be there. No, it wasn't necessary, but it's Clifton James is so fun in the role that you can't hate it. Now, this scene with the child hawking the elephant statue, this is something Roger Moore bemoaned later on because, of course, he became a renowned UNICEF ambassador for the later years of his life. And, of course, Bond saying, can you help me get this go faster? I'll give you 20,000 baht, and just knocks him off. I'll have to owe you. And people are like, oh, that's terrible. But if you notice the next bit of dialogue, the last bit that the kid says, he immediately drops his whole pathetic, please buy my elephant, da-da-da-da-da, you're very handsome, mister. He immediately says, bloody tourist. So I think that was meant to help try and undercut the callousness of Bond maybe knocking a child back into the clong. But it is one of those little bits where it's like, oh man, that's really, and it made Roger Moore wince terribly because, of course, here he is, this UNICEF ambassador for many, many years doing fantastic work. And, here he is, the man with the golden gun doing that. And there we saw our first glimpse of Sheriff J.W. Pepper being back, and they actually, advertised it in the trailers. Sheriff J.W. Pepper is back, so it was a part of selling the film. It's also funny that we don't just see Pepper, we see his wife, and they're on vacation, so we see him out of his element, which is, it's a nice thing to, if you're gonna bring a character back and he's gonna be in some other location, at least there is a plausible reason why he's there, and he's totally out of his element, and the humor, of course, is because of all of this. And of course, in the production, they were all told, don't go into the clogs because the water is horribly nasty. And, you see all these people in the water and bathing and stuff. And Roger Moore went out of the boat at one point, and everybody's like, don't swallow any water because it's so toxic. And that's a beautifully executed stunt of crashing the boat through. And you notice, they all have to be just out of range, but that's still a boat crashing through. And of course, they would reprise that in Moonraker with the breaking of the gondola. I love how Bond just motors back by slowly and waves, and it's just like rubbing it in. And then he'll go back once more. We get this wonderful profile shot of Bond. Pepper looks, and he gets this look on his face. And we hear the James Bond theme slightly, and then John Barry masterfully does the little quote of the Live and Let Die theme as we see the thought flash across Pepper's head for that instant, and then he shakes it away. It's the exact right thing to do, and it's so fleeting, but it's so perfectly timed. I've always so appreciated that moment of continuity. And then this nice little blast of the James Bond theme to get us into the transition to the next sequence, which, interestingly, is this nice gong crash. And there's a number of these used as transitional moments when we cut back to Haifat, when we cut back to Scaramanga or another location. And I've always loved those. It's almost like a slightly satirical sonic moment, I think. Not like what we get later with the slide whistle over the Astro Spiral jump, but it's a nice little thing I've always loved. It's like cut back to Haifat's place, gong. Now, this is another scene that has really dark undercurrents, like the confrontation with Lazar, because, of course, this is where Scaramanga eliminates Haifat, and we see him setting all these things out. We haven't seen the golden gun built and put together, and the conceit is that the golden gun can be taken anywhere because it's comprised of items that are seemingly everyday. And this was something the prop department had to come up with, and Christopher Lee had to really practice because he had a lot of trouble at being able to build and assemble the gun quickly and also without looking and having to act at the same time. So this was a very difficult thing to do, and he also has to do it while doing the dialogue and covering it up because people wouldn't know. Haifat wouldn't realize that he's literally not long for this world. And it's set up by the dialogue, Bond has never seen you, but he knows me. That's the problem. And then Christopher Lee has the wonderful delivery of, that's no problem. And then immediately his face goes cold. And then there's a nice moment of silence where Guy Hamilton lets the moment play out. The one shot And then Scaramanga coldly disassembles the gun very quickly, And then we see the guy running in, and then the payoff. What happened? Mr. Fat has just resigned. I'm the new chairman of the board. And then another lovely bit. He always did like that mausoleum. Put him in it. I've always thought the cutaway to the dancers here, while it is local flavor and wonderful, it's a slightly off-putting thing with this music. So I've always felt like maybe it was supposed to be not just local color, but maybe a tad bit humorous, that suddenly we have these dancers with this music. Now, this is one of my favorite jokes in the entire Bond series. It's blink and you miss it. But when Bond sees the wine, foo yuck. And the waiter replies, 74, sir. And you can see the look on Bond's face. And then he tastes it, and he sort of pauses for a second. And Goodnight is shocked when he says, I approve. Not the wine, you'll frock. Because he's gone back to, trying to charm Goodnight, because as he alludes to later, there's no lead, so there's nothing for us to do tonight. But the foo yuck, that is a Tom Mankiewicz gag that is hysterical, and it, of course, is making fun of Bond's connoisseurship of the finer things, and, of course, his knowledge of wines. But just, it's like Bond drinking the Siamese vodka and You Only Live Twice and flinching, but it's again, you blink and you miss it, but just the name, foo yuck. And, of course, when Bond's attempts to seduce Goodnight is thwarted, and he goes back to the hotel room in this next scene, and he can't do anything. It's late at night, and he's really stuck, unable to do anything at this moment. He's taking his tie off, and he just says, in disgust, he just goes, foo yuck. So foo yuck almost, at least to me in my own life, has become sort of a euphemism for just things being screwed up or being frustrated. I just go, foo yuck. And they actually do make, apparently there are some fans who made some prop bottles, and I would love to get a prop bottle of foo yuck. And it's lovely that Goodnight rejects Bond. We don't see Bond get rejected practically ever. And, that did happen some in Fleming's novels, so it gives her some character, and I always like that, but it's immediately undone because, of course, she shows up in a nightie in his hotel room. And I love the fact that Nick Nack is spying on Bond. We get this wonderful cutaway. And it must be said how wonderful Hervé Villechaize is in this film. Because when you have, films that call for, and I never know what is the correct term to use. People used to say midgets. Now you don't know if you're supposed to say little people or whichever. But any film that calls for an actor of smaller stature like that, almost always it's for comic relief or something. And it's to the film's credit that, Nick Nack is an intelligent character. And Hervé Villechaize himself said that's part of what really attracted him to doing the role, that it wasn't just a comic relief character. Again, here, Goodnight appears, and, it's like, why did she do this? My hard-to-get act didn't last very long, did it? So again, okay, that's a little bit of fun, but the gag here becomes that we think Bond and Goodnight will finally get together, and Goodnight will get what she wants, but of course she's going to be thwarted once again because Andrea Anders will show up, and first Goodnight will be buried under the sheets and alluded to as the three-pillow trick, which we see in Dr. No, and then she'll be thrown into the closet to sleep while she has to listen to Bond making love to Miss Anders. I love the music cue here, and Bond lies in wait with the lights off, and Andre comes in this looking fantastic in this wonderful dress, and she's so trepidatious. She goes to reach for the sheets, thinking it's Bond. And the wonderful line, I didn't recognize you with your clothes on. And Roger has this sort of almost grin at first. But you see, he's still playing her. He immediately puts on the hard edge again because he's having to get information out of her. Now, while this scene usually gets, people talk about, it's more like a sitcom with Bond having to hide his lady friend around or like almost under the bed and in the closet and stuff. I mean, it's like sort of very beautifully messed up in a funny sense because, of course, good nights in the closet, having to listen to Bond and Andrea make love. But this is where we get the full reveal of the plot, because Andrea here reveals that the golden bullet was not sent by Scaramanga, but it was sent by her because she sees Bond as her savior. That because Scaramanga respects him and hero worships him and talks about Bond, and she knows that he is the only possible person that could remove this, controlling torturer in a way that controls her entire existence. And Bond is having to digest all of this. And then she comes in closer, and you can just feel the desperation, and of course, she's risking her life to come here, as she says. And as a plot, again, when you look at it, this is very much has a lot of From Russia with Love vibes. And I think it's nothing short of brilliant. I really do. By convoluting the matter, by making it not just a mano-a-mano conflict, but making it Scaramanga's mistress in an attempt to get out of his control, reaching out, pretending to be Scaramanga. And she's completely desperate, and now she's actually literally throwing herself at Bond, and she says so plaintively and so pathetically almost, Bond's been dreaming of a Solex agitator, and she says, "You can have me too if you like. I'm not unattractive." And it's so pathetic in a way. She's so desperate that she's literally offering herself as well, which of course is what she's been forced to do with Scaramanga for who knows how long. So she's a very tragic character, and of course meets a very tragic and very iconic ending in the film. But it's unfortunate that Bond is so rough with her because she's such a tragic character and becomes the film's sacrificial lamb. And this was early on in Maud Adams' career, and she would, of course, return as Octopussy in 1983, being the first actress to notably come back and play two roles in the series. She has great chemistry with Roger and is great in both films, and I just always loved the just desperation that she has in her eyes in the film, and just it's not that her face has a blank look, but you can just feel like all this tension beneath her very cold demeanor. I love how Bond has the line, "It was an inspiration sending that bullet." And we get a wonderful shot of the robe dropping down, and all we see are her bare legs. It's, again, the exact right amount of sensuality to, obviously, the cutaway for the sex scene. And we get to see Goodnight and the uncomfortable hotel suite of the closet. I've always loved John Barry's cue here, this little sting cutting back to Scaramanga's junk as Andrea comes in late at night, sneaking back on board. She's obviously been missed, so Scaramanga is suspicious, but he doesn't open his eyes. He's just lying there, almost as in stasis. Then only when she opens the safe without opening his eyes, she says, "You're late." And she has this cover story about it being a double feature she went to. Although, why would she go to a double feature in evening wear? I don't know, but she opens the safe. He says, "What are you doing?" "I'm putting my jewelry away," which, of course, is how she will then get access to the Solex. And we see the Solex, so it sets up the fact that she will be able to steal it to get it to Bond, which is the pact she just made with him before engaging in relations. And if you look at the way that Roger plays this, it's like, what time is it? 2-ish. And he has the cigar already lit. Of course, Roger didn't like smoking cigarettes, and after a certain point, he would just give up smoking entirely. But he was a cigar smoker, which is why you see Bond smoking cigars in both The Man with the Golden Gun and Live and Let Die. I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly when he gave up smoking, but Bond smoking on screen became a thing where you rarely saw it because, of course, the dangers of smoking became much more apparent. So it became a thing like Bond's fedora disappearing after the 1960s. Roger being obviously the first Bond actor to noticeably not wear a hat and not wear a hat in the gun barrels. So this is where Bond and Scaramanga meet, and what makes this scene really work is we see this kickboxing match, but this was actually a match that the film, the production set up. They got real kickboxing greats, and they set up, this was a real match with real spectators, and it was set up entirely for the film. And so this was the real location, and these are real fans, and it really gives this scene authenticity. And we hear all their chanting on the soundtrack the whole time, and it really sells it. So this is obviously the public place where Bond and Andrea have gone to meet so she can pass him the Solex and, not be observed. Now, this is one of the most iconic deaths in the series, and of course, we don't see it. When we see her face and it's already frozen and she's got this large hat on, it shadows her eyes, and of course, we know that she's dead, and she's having to sit there very still with her mouth open, so it's a great performance, but you see the air blowing her hair slightly even. I mean, it's just fascinating. And then Bond looks over and the camera tracks in, and if you notice the bullet hole, you see the trickle of blood, but it's right under the lapel of her jacket. So Scaramanga has shot her from a distance in the packed arena, and she had no idea it was coming, and in her death, she felt that last second of terror because she knows that she's been shot and she's dead, and Scaramanga has found her. But he's even tucked the bullet hole where it won't be seen. And then Bond is looking in the purse and offers a line to the man who sat next to him. And only when Scaramanga introduces himself with the identity by his first line, not giving his name yet, Bond realizes what's going on, but Scaramanga already has Knick-Knack behind him with a gun on Bond, so Bond can't pull his PPK, he can't go into action. So Scaramanga has set this up knowing that Bond would probably show up, and he hero worships Bond, so he set up this encounter to where he can talk to Bond one-on-one as, fellow great men of assassinry, as it were, and so they can meet, and Bond won't try to kill him, and, because he thinks the Solex isn't there, although you would think he would have maybe looked on the ground, but it's only because Bond goes that extra step that he finds the Solex. And here we have Christopher Lee giving the backstory that Fleming created for Scaramanga in the novel The Man with the Golden Gun, and he does it just magnificently. You can see just a gamut of emotion in his close-ups. He goes from cold to vivid, and he's having, this vivid moment that changed the course of his life. And then you see just his teeth, like he starts to draw back, when he recounts the first time he killed a man in cold blood as a child. But then I discovered I like killing people even more. And you can see how this strikes Bond, because Bond himself is a killer, but he doesn't like killing in cold blood because he still has his humanity, whereas Scaramanga has none. Although Scaramanga views Bond as an equal and of his own, and admires him, but of course he does not know that Bond still has his humanity, and Scaramanga just has no. Because he has no humanity, he views it as weakness. And I love that he simply says, "Personally, I have nothing against you, so hope our paths don't cross again. Please don't try to follow me." And you can see the bemusement on Christopher Lee's face. I mean, you really have to love Scaramanga, and you love Knick-Knack, and you love their relationship, so it's really such a shame when Bond has to kill him. I love how sort of miffed he is when Hip sort of jostles him there. And Bond is already toying with Knick-Knack, but of course Knick-Knack has somehow literally gotten out of the arena faster than a blink of an eye. And unfortunately, poor Goodnight is going to use her intelligence skills, but maybe without the common sense that goes along with them. So it's like, oh great, she's gonna try and place the Homer on the car because she recognizes Knick Knack, and okay, this is gonna be cool. So you could make the distinction. This is maybe like when Tiffany Case sees the woman walking out with the cat in the casino in Diamonds Are Forever, and that's how she gets captured. Well, this is obviously same screenwriters, so that's something that I didn't notice for the longest time, but it is also, of course, how Bond is able to track Scaramanga back to his island because no one knows where his home base is. So it does serve purpose, and it isn't just because Goodnight is a klutz. It's there for important story reasons, because without this, we'd have to have some other way of Bond being able to trace Scaramanga back to the island. I love how Christopher Lee just shoves Britt Eklund into the trunk and then has this nice little sort of half smile as he closes the trunk, and it's like, what's running through Scaramanga's mind at this point? And of course, the gag here being that, they can't find Goodnight. Then they realize she's been locked in Scaramanga's trunk. She has the car keys, so they can't start the car. And on top of it, she has the Solex they just got back. So once again, the whole mission has been fouled up. And Bond is really up against it because now he can't even start the car, and he's lost the Solex again. And then Goodnight is so excited, and I've got the Solex too. Isn't that great? And, Hip tries to get a taxi. Unfortunately, this is really his exit from the film, and I love Sun Taiko's energy in the role. So he's actually one of my favorite Bond allies, but I always hated that this is pretty much where he disappears. But this is where Sheriff Pepper really comes into play. And because this film had a sponsorship with AMC, they got that because the AMC Hornet was the car that the Astro Spiral Jump was designed around. So when they decided they wanted to use that in the film, they had to use the AMC Hornet. So they obviously got some participation with AMC, which is why Scaramanga is driving an AMC Matador. And of course, car geeks will know AMC cars are not that renowned, and they did not last really that long after the 1970s. So people today will have no idea what any of these cars are. And Sheriff Pepper is shown to be just as foolish as before, with lines like, "I know you. You're that English secret agent from England." But I love how he can immediately pick up on, "You're chasing somebody." And then the line, who are you after this time? Commies? Let's go get him. It's just the right element of just ridiculous and whimsical. And then they hear the honking, and Knick Knack turns around. "I think we got trouble." And this sets up this wonderful little chase. There's nothing really over the top. We get this nice bit of going up on the island to get around the traffic because, of course, Bond is having to floor it to keep up with Scaramanga because he has to get to Goodnight, get her and the Solex back. And we get this nice chase through the city streets. Again, there's no fantastic set piece. There's no super crazy driving. It's all nice, gritty, realistic, and it fits in with all of the great 70s car chase films. But it's setting up, of course, the famous Astro Spiral Jump. And if you had a bunch of crazy stunts and things going on, and then it culminated in the Astro Spiral Jump, it would kind of detract from that being this signature stunt of the movie. And of course, that had been performed at the Astrodome, and that's how the producers and everybody became aware of it. And they decided they wanted to have it in the film, and they brought everybody over, and they set the whole stage, designed the ramps, and used the computer calculations to ensure that it would be doable. And of course, the fact that this is really an actual car doing a football spiral in a complete 360-degree pattern before your very eyes, it's just astonishing. And it's, the signature moment of the film that nobody can take away from it. It's one of the signature Bond moments that everybody knows, even if they haven't seen the film. But I do like the nice bit of interplay. We see Scaramanga sort of, using all these back streets to throw Bond off the trail. And again, sort of like Bond leading the cops around in the Diamonds Are Forever police chase. So there's a nice bit of humor there. And we get the just the nice bit of actual cars going. And then here, Bond does the nice classic maneuver, having to throw the car into reverse and do a reverse skid to then throw it back into first gear again to basically, turn around. And of course, they'll reuse that in the Citroen chase and For Your Eyes Only. And of course, you see just cars get smashed up all over the place, which you see in, all three of the Guy Hamilton 70s films. And then we get a nice blast of John Barry here. Again, it's at the right place because we're getting some nice movement in this chase, and we're building up to the Astro Spiral jump on the bridge. And because we saw Scaramanga before throw Bond off, it sets up how he's able to do it here. Love how Pepper encourages Bond to floor it. We see the car lift off a few times, so it actually is going so fast, get some nice air off the ground. And then, of course, where the hell they got to? And then we get the nice wave from Knick Knack. And once again, Bond has screwed up. You goofed, boy. Nearest bridge is 2 miles back, but instead of going all the way, Bond goes back and spies the broken bridge. Now, what doesn't help is of course, the infamous slide whistle that's over the bridge, which John Barry, admitted was a total mistake. It undercuts the tension of the stunt. What it needed was a bit more of the dramatic buildup, like you got in the bus crash in Live and Let Die. It needs that nice bit of extra tension, in the editing to build up and then, just drop everything so you can get the stunt full force. But we do get the beautiful payoff line after 2 films. Bond saying, "I sure am, boy." And there's, of course, the slide whistle. I mean, still, just one of the best stunts in any film, period, ever. But, we get the slide whistle, and then we see Sheriff Pepper throw him backwards. Although you have to wonder, because of the aerial car stunt and it being sort of reddish orange, it makes you think of what eventually became the Dukes of Hazzard television series. So I've always wondered if that maybe was an inspiration in people's heads. Now, I've always loved how we get that nice bit more of the John Barry action cue, and then it goes back to the sedate Scaramanga music. And they close the door, and you have no idea what he's doing here. But, of course, he's changing over into the car plane, which originally was going to be a real car plane that had been invented. But, unfortunately, the creators of that vehicle, it crashed while they were flying it. So this had to be a mock-up by the production. And it's beautifully designed. It looks fantastic. It's just unfortunate it's not real. Now, I love John Barry's really dark rendering of the James Bond theme here when Bond gets out and he's trying to be quiet, and then Sheriff Pepper gets out. "Let's go get him, boy!" So, Bond is trying to be stealthy. He knows Scaramanga's in there. He's trying to figure out what he's up to, and he gets prepared to, blast his way through the locked door. But, of course, they're not only stopped by the police, but also this being Scaramanga's escape route. I love the extra additional bit that Pepper plugs his ears to avoid hearing the gunshot. Now, again, people say that the character's inclusion in the film is a bit much and it's not believable. But again, it doesn't stop the film. And after this point, he's out of the story. And we get this wonderful comic bit where he is completely ridiculous, pulls out his wallet, and they just immediately slap handcuffs on him. Now, I have to admit, this is just a wonderful bit of production design. Like, I've always loved the way that they actually blended it into the car, and it's the same color. as the actual car body itself, and they're able to actually drive the AMC Matador. And of course, he has motorized doors and everything. Now, of course, once it actually takes off, it's a model, and if you look really closely in some shots, you can tell that it's obviously a small model. That's why John Steers was very careful to make sure that in the frame you have the branches of the tree in the corner to try and give it some scale. But again, it's the performance of Christopher Lee and Hervé Villechaize and the close-ups inside the cabin. See, there's the tree out of focus to try and give it scale. But it's Lee especially selling it when he just like pulls back on the steering wheel, just that dedication that sells that, And everybody just looks up and they just can't believe what they saw. And then Pepper says, "I'm going to get Henry Kissinger." So Scaramanga has gotten away, and Bond has once again screwed up. And he's gotten away with not just the Solex, but with Good Night as well. And of course, Sony, I suppose, had some sort of production involvement because we see Sony TVs, we see Sony equipment, and these Sony walkie-talkies. Good Night's going to break out, but of course they're several thousand feet up in the air. And if you notice, I think it's meant to be seen that she drops the walkie-talkie out of the car trunk there because it disappears from her hand, so they no longer have direct contact. And again, you can just see the look on him's face. So you do see Hip here in the background. This is his last scene in the film, but from this point onward, it becomes the Bond versus Scaramanga mano a mano confrontation that was the original subject of the first Mankiewicz draft. But you can see him is completely beside himself. He's just like, "Oh, what about this? Oh, we don't have it. She had the Solex. Where's Good Night? We don't know." Oh. And even Q's Homer isn't working until eventually they finally pick up the signal. And of course, mapping it out and going even further, and then eventually realizing that it's, as they say, in red Chinese waters where they obviously can't go. This is something that I think gets mirrored later on in Tomorrow Never Dies and the Halo jump once the U.S. forces realize that Bond is jumping into the territory of Vietnam. But I like that Bond proposes to fly under the radar, to sneak in, and do this mission completely unauthorized. So he is going in without a safety net. So we get that wonderful transition to the gorgeous islands of Phuket, which were and still are gorgeous, but it was like untouched lands at this point. And now, of course, the location is known as James Bond Island, and it's filled with tourists and souvenir shops. And even though it's a national park, it's obviously the actual location looks totally different. There's people everywhere, and there's pollution and everything. So unfortunately, it's no longer this beautiful, unspoiled, amazing territory. Again, this is Bond going in without a safety net, and he's in a seaplane, which was, a very new thing at the time. This was, technology most people were not aware of, and the owner of this plane literally flew it all the way over from the United States. Now, you saw there, like, he actually clipped the tree branch itself because he's flying that low, and he's having to fly over water as well. So, again, we're selling the fact that this is dangerous. Bond is having to stay under the Chinese radar, but he's still spotted by this little observation post that's on the ground. And this is how Scaramanga is alerted because they're, as he said before, they're his landlords. So anyone approaching, he gets word because they'll just give him a call. And I guess this is what happened when, Rodney showed up in the pre-titles. He's a guest I'm expecting. We get the nice, dark piano chords on John Barry's score. And then, no, he won't be leaving. Cut back to Bond. Music is very dramatic. I always like that he doesn't have his suit jacket on because he's, obviously been flying for some time. And we hear the beeping of the tracker get louder, so it's like the homing device and the DB5 and Goldfinger And as Bond gets closer, the beeping increases until it finally stops because Bond has reached his destination. He has to fly over and then loop back around and taxi up onto that beach, which the pilot found difficult. He had to do it twice, and then on the second one, he kind of crashed the plane a little bit. So it's a hard landing, but it leads to the most unintentionally humorous moment in the film. The shot of Roger when the plane is landing, he does this little like sort of rocking motion right there. It's very brief, but it always cracked me up seeing it as a kid, still does. And for some reason, they used that shot in the trailer. The main trailer for the film uses not only the shot of Roger rocking, but the dancers at the hotel. So the two strangest shots in the film are in the trailer. Now, I love the fact that there's no one there to greet him at first. You hear the chirping of the birds. Bond opens the door, gets his jacket out, and he's looking around. It's not a jungle scenario, but it's, obviously Bond is out and in the middle of the villain's lair. Knick-Knack appears in tuxedo with a bottle of Dom Perignon. Bond gets a classic line about his preferred vintage, a crack about the peanuts. And Scaramanga welcomes him by shooting the cork off the bottle. And almost with a childlike glee, a vulgar display, but I couldn't resist it. He's so delighted, and he really is. And he takes the gun, a harmless toy, And he makes the point, I'm completely unarmed. Of course, we know that he could be armed at a moment's notice, but you can see such a charming, wonderful quality. And Scaramanga here is opening himself up. He says, ours is the loneliest profession, so let us spend a few pleasant hours together. And he shows Bond all he's accomplished. He walks him through the complex. He shows him his trophies and everything because he has no one else to show this to. He really is a lonely man in that sense. And in the classic Bond villain scenario, Bond gets to see the operation, as Dr. No said, I tell you all this because you're the one man I've met capable of appreciating what I've done and keeping it to himself. Just look at Christopher Lee's eyes and the way he smiles. He is literally delighted to be here in this film, in every shot that he's in. It is just a magnificent performance. Not only is he one of the great Bond villains, without question, I think it's, very much, quite possibly, his best performance in any film. And I love the fact that Scaramanga admits he's not a scientist. So he's explaining this stuff. He says the airlock is automatic, of course. And then he says later on, the energy for the solar power is collected through here. But I don't know. Science was never my strong point. And then Bond has to explain it to him. I love the fact that Scaramanga has taken over, ostensibly this was all built by High Fat's construction company. So it makes sense that, this is all there. And this is the culmination of the solar plot that Richard Maybaum wrote in. And a lot of people say that it's, the most dated aspect of the film because it's talking about the energy crisis of the 1970s, referring to the oil crisis that led people to, fear for the validity of oil as an energy source and to look at alternatives, especially solar energy. But, that's still a problem that's never left us. Solar energy still hasn't been tapped to its fullest potential. So the idea that somebody could use a bit of British technology that had been stolen and use it to power and develop their own solar facility that they then offer to the highest bidder is a global catastrophe type event because they're essentially selling the power of the world. And as Bond smartly points out in a moment, the controlling oil interests will try and outbid like crazy to keep solar energy off the market. So there's a nice bit of political intrigue just thinking about this stuff. And Scaramanga concludes, he will literally have the sun in his pocket. Now, a personal note, I have to admit here, when Bond says the oil sheiks will pay you to keep solar energy off the market, well, when I first saw this film as a like a 5-year-old, I obviously was not aware that of the oil sheikhs throughout, Arabia controlling oil interests. So I thought Bond was referring to like oil corporation heads and called them oil sheikhs for some reason. So I always thought that the heads of oil companies were thus called oil sheikhs. Now, of course, we're shown where the Solex belongs in such a bit of machinery, and we're able to see how the energy is collected, which sets up Bond in the climax trying to get the Solex out, and the danger when Goodnight accidentally activates the console, because we've seen what this can do, and Bond is down there in the pit, so he has to obviously not get hit by the beam of energy. Now, this is a really well done mixture of miniature work and real location footage. This shot here, obviously, it's the miniature coming out of, it's the dodgiest part of it. But if only you're looking very close, you can notice the film texture is a little bit different, but it's really well done. And this, of course, was all done by Derek Meddings, who is, probably the most legendary name in film miniatures. He started, his first Bond film was Live and Let Die. He did the explosions in the poppy field. And in particular, his miniatures of Scaramanga's Island during the explosions, which I'll talk to when we get to the inevitable blowing up of the lair climax, are just impeccably done. And all the miniatures of the rock and the mirrors and even the clouds were all done by hand, and they're really well done. It's just obviously there are one or two spots where you can spot the seams if you look closely enough. Now, this is the fun bit where Scaramanga literally gets to wield this golden gun, and as he puts it, this is a bonus, goes with the Solex, no extra charge. But it allows him to destroy Bond's only means of escape by blowing up the seaplane. And it looks so real that, I was always like, they didn't really blow up the plane, did they? And no, of course they had to build an exact replica, but they just load it with explosives. And you see, this is the part I really like. And you see that gleam and Christopher Lee's eyebrows raise as he blows it up. That's what I call solo power. That's what I call trouble. I am now undeniably the man with the golden gun. Brilliant play on the title. Immediately cut to Knick-Knack banging a dinner gong over the intercom. It's just a bizarre image. And the Scaramanga replies, lunch. And we see Knick-Knack has prepared this beautiful meal because, of course, he's a cordon bleu, which is just this bizarre, wonderful touch. And Knick-Knack is he's really the ultimate butler. He knows and can do everything with fantastic skill. Bond a bit perplexed to see Goodnight in a bikini, and of course Scaramanga, no concealed weapons. Now, this scene is not talked about enough. This is Bond and Scaramanga coming clean with one another. Bond showing his ultimate contempt for Scaramanga. The dialogue and performance is very important. Now, on that close-up of the lighter, you'll notice it has the Colibri logo. They had they're named in the credits as being, the suppliers of the fine gold pieces for the golden gun, but of course the production literally just had to build it themselves by hand. And Bond makes a crack about the wine, and it's reminiscent of such and such. Scaramanga simply says, I must add that to my cellar, and he writes that down. And then Bond is like, you live well. Now, this is where Scaramanga is, toasting Bond, we are the best, we are just alike, except for the fact that, I admit what I am, and you work for peanuts. Bond saying you're full of it becomes sort of a catchphrase, and of course it's used again by Timothy Dalton in The Living Daylights. Now, if you look at Roger's performance here, he is ice cold, and he's trying to puncture Scaramanga's ego, but Scaramanga isn't taking it at first. It's this beautiful back and forth between the two actors. This is the egos coming to a head, and then Scaramanga's managed to put the gun together. And he's got the drop on Bond, who went for the PPK. Bond freezes, But then Scaramanga says, I could have shut you down when you landed, but that would have been ridiculously easy. He has this monologue here about, for once in his life, like every great artist wanted to create an indisputable masterpiece. I mean, he has such a vigor for this. It's a dream of his, he's encountered Bond, so what could be better than actually killing Bond himself to prove once and for all that he is the greatest shot in the world. And Bond tries to play it off with humor, stuffed and displayed over your rocky mantelpiece, but knows that Scaramanga is dead serious by this fervor he has. I only need one. I mean, with that level of coldness, and then immediately cutting to the still, non-moving eye of the gun barrel itself. And then Bond realizing that he means literally, an actual duel with 10 paces and everything. Insulting Scaramanga once more. You see Scaramanga's face fall slightly. And then he tries to hold back the smile when Bond accepts. And then Bond decides to eat his final meal as the condemned man anyway. Again, another brilliant usage of Knick-Knack, the slightly bizarre image of Knick-Knack counting off the paces in a duel on the beach. It's just, it's beautifully bizarre. And he goes through the whole motions, and I expect only a clean kill. And the tension is built here beautifully. It's nice to see Bond is dwarfed by Scaramanga a bit because, of course, Christopher Lee was, very physically imposing because he was very tall. And not just that, but the Golden Gun has a much longer barrel than the PPK. So not just Bond, but his weapon seems more diminutive. Now, of course, Scaramanga suppresses a smile, and this is where his trickery starts because, of course, he's not going to play fair. Now, originally, this duel was a lot more elaborate. Scaramanga runs away, gets Bond to fire, because what he's doing is he's trying to get Bond to use all his 6 bullets. And so Bond will go up against Scaramanga, and he'll have no bullets left. Now, originally, there was a lot more going on here. They were hiding behind the rocks, and Bond figures that maybe Scaramanga might have another bullet up his sleeve or something. So he basically comes up with a Molotov cocktail he puts together and hurls it so it's flaming, and Scaramanga has to shoot it. So Bond knows that he shot his 1 bullet, but oh no, Scaramanga has a hidden bullet in his belt buckle. So he's cheating still, obviously. Now that was supposed to happen, and then Scaramanga gets away, and then we have these cutaways, and Bond runs into Knick-Knack. So there was a little bit more business going on, made the duel more elaborate, and they had some dialogue shouting in between the rocks and stuff. And I wish they hadn't have cut that. You see a shot of it in one of the trailers, and to this day, I hope that footage turns up. I think it was no more than a minute or two, but it was another nice little bit of business showing that Scaramanga was very duplicitous and almost childlike, not playing by the rules, which is what the whole Funhouse is about anyway. And of course, because we saw the Funhouse in the pre-title sequence, we know what Scaramanga is up to. And we see the Bond mannequin again, so we know, obviously right now it's a mannequin because Bond is outside. But we don't expect Bond to start beating Scaramanga at his own game, which Bond realizes that's how he'll be able to defeat him. He has to not play by the rules himself. And I love this bit here. Never killed a midget before. That can always be a first time. Oh, monsieur. Knick-Knack smiles. Wait till Bond goes into the trap and then just runs away to go to the control center. Like, he has such a malicious glee at trying to compound everyone's efforts in this. And of course, we get to see him go up these little custom stairs. And I love the fact that he has this motorized chairlift and then the little foot rail so he can look through the viewports. It's just this level of detail to make the whole set believable and lived in is just something I adore. And again, enough cannot be said for Peter Merton's design. And of course, we've seen the red light before, and Bond is drawn to fire once more. He sees Scaramanga. He's so primed to fire, he fires. So now, he's fired twice, leaving him 4 bullets left in the PPK. I've always loved this effect. You see all of the doorways, and of course, the idea is that you stumble on the stairs. We don't see Bond confronted by that skeleton, but we get the nice bit here of him confronting the saloon gunman, and once again we see the very Roger-looking figure. And Knick-Knack is counting the bullets too. Bond is down to 3 bullets. And now he's taunting Bond just as Rodney and Scaramanga were taunted in the pre-title sequence. We do get to see a little bit more of the funhouse this time around. And you have to wonder how in the heck Knick-Knack could project, the dummy figure of Bond from the ending of the maze on one of those mirrors. So like maybe they have a projection system or something. But that, of course, is telling Bond there's a mannequin of himself, an effigy, which, Andre Anders alluded to much earlier, saying, he even has a likeness of you. So this is maybe planting the idea in Bond's head that he can take the place of that effigy once he gets there. So he runs into the plate of glass, and this is the point where you see the actual set construction of the funhouse. And this is where Bond, goes off plot, as it were. He starts using Scaramanga's tactics against him. He's not playing by the rules. Of course, Scaramanga doesn't know this because he's not in the control room. He's in the bottom of the maze lying in wait. He doesn't know that Knick-Knack is losing Bond. And I love how Knick-Knack is starting to get a bit worried, and he starts flipping through all the monitors, and he can't find Bond. He's trying everything, and he gets more and more and more concerned because, although he enjoys taunting his boss in this way, you could tell he has great affection for him, and Scaramanga for him. They have this wonderful, affectionate relationship. So you can tell he's really getting worried for his boss at this point. And again, once again, because Bond is human, he has now dropped his PPK, so now he is completely unarmed. So the 3 bullets go out the window, and he's given his position away. So Scaramanga knows that, okay, now something is up. That noise shouldn't have been there, and Bond should have been here by now. Now, of course, how in the world that Bond could get to that point in front of Scaramanga and take the place of his double, put the suit jacket on and everything, and I guess, lay the wax figure on the ground without, Scaramanga or anybody noticing, that it stretches believability maybe a little bit much, but again, this is the funhouse is a much smaller set than most people realize because, of course, it's still within the island itself. Here's the nice montage with the rising music. You have these violin strings blending together, really building this nice tension because we don't know, and Scaramanga doesn't know, and Knick-Knack doesn't know what Bond's up to. So Bond is somewhere in the funhouse, and we know he's prepared a trap of his own somehow. And only here in the shot, you see a slight movement, and then the whole figure of the mannequin turns with the hand going down. And just as we realize, Scaramanga realizes, only too late. And he has such a sad look on his face, and it's such a shame he gets killed. But as you see, Bond kills him with 1 shot. So Scaramanga only needed 1, Bond only needed 1. So that's a nice added touch. Now here we think that Goodnight is going to finally, do one for the team, and she knocks the wonderfully beefy Craw out. But of course, as alluded to earlier, we know that the helium must be kept at 0 degrees, and Goodnight has laid him out cold there. And as Bond alludes to later, don't you believe in signs? Now I love that brief shot. You can see the figure they made of supposed to be Craw. He's already frozen over. I love how Goodnight has come in at the exact moment that Bond has killed Scaramanga, although we just saw her knock Craw out. And Bond has, of course, taken the clothes of the mannequin as well, so his tailoring is different now. And Bond is going to take care of Craw, so he's sneaking around, and, you wait here, I'll go get the maintenance man. I already knocked him out cold. And Bond is just so surprised that Goodnight has done this. It's like, oh, wow, finally I don't have to do something. And then you can almost feel the sighs. He landed in that one. And now, of course, we have the ticking clock because, of course, now the whole place is going to go sky high. But it's a fun gag, and I love the fact that Goodnight, finally does something right for a change, and of course screws the whole thing up because now Bond has only a few minutes to get the Solex and get them both out of there before the whole place just explodes. And of course, it's a shame because had this place survived, it could have not only solved the energy crisis but it also could have brought solar energy to the masses if scientists had been able to study the high fat designs. But of course, if there was really a Solex agitator, then solar energy would really have become a thing much sooner. And I like how we get these sparks in the cutaways. Of course, all of the explosions of this are Derek Medding's miniatures. And again, they're just astonishing. It literally looks like the whole set is being blown up because the miniature's so convincing. Now, this is admittedly goofy and dumb, but, when's the last time you saw a film where the whole climax revolves around a girl's bum hitting a control panel? Like, it's just, it's just goofy enough. Yeah, it's a little on the dumb side, but of course Goodnight has no idea that she's just done this. She was so intently watching Bond, and now she's watching this thing rise. She doesn't think to say anything. And we see Bond's hand and his head is over there, and then he's moved out of the way just in time. And of course, now Bond has little time, and he has to try and give Goodnight directions on how to turn off the control panel, which I find hysterical because she's in over her head, and he's even like, now listen carefully. There must be a scanner interlock button. Push it. And she has no idea what's going on. Are you still there? It's just, again, it's trying to find ways to frustrate Bond and do something different and new, and give a freshness to the climax we all know is happening, and it still fits with the jokey tone that's been throughout the film. And of course, the sun goes behind the cloud. Bond thinks Goodnight has turned it off. Goodnight thinks she's turned it off somehow. Bond will try to get the Solex out again, and of course the danger becoming that once the sun comes out of the cloud again, if Bond is not out of there, he will be killed, and he has no idea, so the suspense builds, and John Barry scores the heck out of it. Again, it must be said, I think John Barry's score, I think he really sold himself short, because this is a really great score, still not released in its entirety, unfortunately, on the soundtrack release, but it's really fantastic and amazing that he scored the whole film in just, like 2 weeks. And I love the fact that the editing is done perfectly, so Bond gets the little hatch open and pries the Solex right at the moment the beam cuts on. So unlike sometimes when there's a timer on the bomb and, it's a little bit incongruous, they do too much cutting away. There's no way that, the timer would have already run out. It's cut just right. Now, you look at the explosions. That's really Roger Moore and Britt Eklund, and, this was really difficult for them because those explosions were really close, and they were supposed to, set them once they got past, and they really go off. And you see Britt Eklund fall, and Roger have to literally go back and grab her. And when they go around this rock here, they barely make it around the corner, and this huge explosion goes off. I mean, it's really close right there. And Roger said, it singed the hairs off the back of his head. And the great line, his junk is moored around the corner. Again, there's the explosion shot. You see all the little bits of shrapnel going off. It is fantastic and a tribute to the genius of Derek Meddings. It's just phenomenal. It looks so real. And then when you get the big exterior shots of the whole island exploding, of course, it's, coming from the inside. And Medding said that he built the explosives into it so that way they could really seem to come from within. It's just exquisite model work. And so this gives us our nice interlude, but of course we will have the final tag ending with the villain that, as Guy Hamilton would put it, we hoped everyone has now forgotten about because it's never quite over. I've always wondered if it's an ad lib where, Goodnight asks, "Who's at the wheel?" and Bond replies, "George, the automatic pilot." And so I've always wondered if that was any sort of reference to George Lazenby. I don't know if that was intended or maybe if it was something Roger cooked up, but it's just always something I wondered if that was supposed to be an in joke. So, of course, Knick Knack will appear, and once again, Goodnight's tryst with Bond that we think she's finally going to get to have is going to be thwarted once again for a final time. And I think this maybe is like the fullest realization of what was supposed to be the Sylvia Trench character that we see in Dr. No from Russia with Love. She was supposed to be like Miss Moneypenny, appear in every film, and Bond would always get called away, so their lovemaking couldn't happen. So maybe I've always felt maybe this is supposed to be like the fullest realization of that. Now, Knick Knack here is literally out to kill Bond. He goes at everything in this film with real professionalism and care. And if you look, he takes this knife and he puts it in his mouth and he bites down on it lengthwise. So it's like he's literally so determined that he sticks the knife in and he bites down on the blade itself. And of course, it beggars belief for most people. How can Bond fight Knick Knack in this way? But again, Knick Knack is determined, and you literally have to say, "I kill you, I kill you." He's determined, even though he's having to use everything at his disposal. So, he crawls into the couch, and Bond thinks he's there, but of course, he's a bit confused and perplexed. So it is, intentionally a bit humorous, this final fight, which, of course, the final fight in Diamonds Are Forever with Wynton Kidd is also a little bit intentionally humorous. But, chucking the wine bottles, have all the glass everywhere. And I've always wondered, how does Goodnight know she got all the broken glass out of the bed? Because if you've ever had to, clean up broken glass, as we all have, there's always a piece or two left over. And of course, there's a conveniently large enough suitcase. And I love that some of the glass comes and almost looks like it's going to hit the camera. And then some of Knick Knack's dialogue is just priceless. "What are you doing? I can't breathe. Big bull, you'll be sorry." And my favorite line, "I'm maybe small, but I never forget." I've used that line too many times. And then Bond simply says, "Just shut up." And it's alluded to that he's just disposed of Knick Knack. Even Goodnight is like, "Oh, James, you didn't." "Yes, I damn well did." But of course, it's revealed in the final shot that Bond did not kill Knick Knack and, spared him. So honestly, it's a shame he never came back. I think maybe that's of course what they did with Baron Samedi in Live and Let Die. They thought he was such a great character that, they wondered if he could come back somehow. So they showed him in the final shot. So I think maybe that was the idea with Knick Knack as well. Of course, it's curious, how would M know to call Scaramanga's phone? How would he have the phone number? How would he know that they were on Scaramanga's junk? So I guess you're supposed to make the jump of logic that Goodnight has already contacted MI6 and M, that they've gotten away and they have the Solex and stuff. But of course, sets up the great Mankiewicz line, something came up. And the film will end on a very obvious sexual pun line, using the Goodnight name finally. And yes, it's a tad on the raunchy side, but it's so perfectly delivered that it works, and it helps us exit the film with a wonderful knowing wink and leaving M, slightly perturbed once more. And with the final "Good night, sir" joke, we exit the film and gives us a nice exit line. We get the shot of Knick Knack. He looks miserable on the boat. And then in a nice touch, we get the return of Lulu's title song, but it has a particular extra verse for the end credits to make it a special end credit version. And then actually says James Bond is here, which I always loved that touch. Very self-referential. And of course, they would do this again in The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker end credits by making a special end credit version of the title song. So that is the ending of The Man with the Golden Gun. It is a film that is, obviously very much of its time, but it is full of inspired moments. Guy Hamilton still has really great directorial instincts. But again, I think the two factors that make it more questionable for most people, what they're reacting to is the fact that the production was a bit rushed because Transamerica, really, who owned United Artists, really wanted a new James Bond film, and they didn't really have the usual time to polish everything, particularly the different script drafts between the Mankiewicz and Maybaum drafts. So that, and Guy Hamilton and everybody else, Tom Mankiewicz feeling a bit, like the batteries needed recharging, and they just didn't quite get to do that. I think that's what causes people to feel the film is maybe a bit off or a bit different. But I think it's a really fantastic film, unbelievably inventive and horrendously underrated. I do think it is a great film. We get to see Bond very gruff and wonderfully angry throughout, and really having to solve this threat against his life. So ultimately, I feel The Man with the Golden Gun is a film that's an end of an era, really. You can't get away from that. It is the point at which the partnership between Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman that had begun in 1962 with Dr. No formally broke up. And this was the last film to have any involvement from Harry Saltzman, and it's really a film with a number of lasts for the series. It's the last film directed by Guy Hamilton, who really proved to be the second most important directorial influence on the series and its history and its overall legacy, second only to Terrence Young. And it was the last film to have a credited screenplay contribution by Tom Mankiewicz, although he did go on uncredited on both The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker to certain extents. And it was the last Bond film to have any official work and an official credit for the original cinematographer, Ted Moore, who, of course, did do some work on the film before he fell ill and was replaced by Oswald Morris. So it really does kind of mark the end of an era in a way, and it does have the more intimate, direct human story of, say, a From Russia with Love or a Dr. No, and of course, Following in the Wake of Live and Let Die, but its lack of success at the box office in comparison to what Bond films had been making really kind of convinced everyone that obviously this one did not connect as well as had been intended, and the idea then became that they had to go big once more for spectacle and scale, and that the next film would really have to go for broke, which of course became The Spy Who Loved Me, and that of course was the first film that Cubby Broccoli produced solo. So the whole notion of The Spy Who Loved Me being a film where they had to go for broke is absolutely true. And that became the film that was the make or breaking point for the series. Had that film not been successful, it was, very much apparent that the series would very likely not continue. Some people thought the series might not survive the breakup of the Saltzman-Broccoli partnership, and since The Man with the Golden Gun was not received well, nor did it do the box office numbers Bond had been accustomed to, there were a lot of voices, and not just certain corners, but just overall, a lot of people thinking that maybe Bond was over and done with. In terms of box office numbers, it was no bomb by any means. It did slightly better than Honor Majesty's Secret Service did, but significantly it underperformed compared to not just Live and Let Die, but also Diamonds Are Forever. So its two immediate predecessors, it significantly underperformed, although, it still made $97 million in 1974 money without inflation. But in comparison, Live and Let Die had made about $161 million in 1973 money. So there was a significant drop-off. And I've often wondered what may have caused that, and I often wonder, because of course we can only guess at, say, the marketing campaigns, and the trailer is pretty good that they came up with for 1974, and the poster designs, the original concepts were fantastic for the advanced posters, and then the final Robert McGinnis art is very much in the style of Live and Let Die. but it doesn't seem to have reached the same audience numbers in terms of the marketing campaign as Live and Let Die had. So, and I also think that, people had gotten used to the Bond film every 2 years. So getting back to the Bond film the very next year, while it was a great, Christmas present, it obviously, was, I think, pretty apparent overall that they should have had the usual 2 years or year and a half to get the film, fully polished up and mount a really fantastic marketing campaign and everything. So that of all, of course, came around on The Spy Who Loved Me. So I think everybody pretty much learned their lesson. And again, it was the breaking point for the series, and Cubby Broccoli really had to prove himself all over again, but this time as a solo producer and without Harry Saltzman's involvement at all. And although, I adore the entire original series, The Man with the Golden Gun is undeniably the last of the original era of films, and you really do notice once you notice this quality, it's really indefinable. But the spark that Harry Saltzman had in the Bond series, that wild imaginative streak he had, is this quality that is only found in the first 9 James Bond films, and it's something that it's never quite the same once he's gone, because it's yet another thing of the Bond formula that started on the initial 3 films, that slowly over time, as people left the series and the series grew and evolved, it kept growing and changing as people exited of the original key core production team members. So, with all that being said, I feel The Man with the Golden Gun is far more important than people realize. It's a film that has had such a bad reputation for so long that I feel it's really distorts people's vision of it, and they don't give the film a fair shot when they come to it for the first time. And also, it doesn't help that it's written off as the Kung Fu Bond and a very 70s entry and all these other things you hear about it. But I really feel that's unfair, because you still have Guy Hamilton coming up with some really inventive, bits of direction. He's still giving it his all, even though, as he would have said, very most likely that it would have helped to had more time to recharge the batteries. And you still have some absolutely brilliant plotting from Tom Mankiewicz and Richard Maybaum. Particularly, I think the whole notion of the entire plot halfway through being turned on its head, and when Andrea reveals that she herself sent the bullet to get 007 out there to kill Scaramanga for her, that completely turns the whole movie around. It's a complete left turn and absolutely brilliant. And as I said before, really harkens back to the sort of manipulation of not just Bond, but the British Secret Service, as we see him from Russia with Love. And it's a very human story, because then it's all about our principal cast members. And we have the backdrop of the world crisis and the solar energy, the Solex agitator device, which still is an issue that resides with us here today in the present. So yes, they mentioned the energy crisis of the 70s, which dates it to that point, but it's still something that is still with us, as Bond would say. And this film features absolutely some of Tom Mankiewicz's most inspired writing. It has some of the best one-liners and comic lines of the entire series, and Roger Moore plays it with such aplomb, and Guy Hamilton gets a certain level of meanness out of Roger that you never see before or again. And I think it's really helpful to note how threatened Bond is by the notion of Scaramanga being after him, and that causes him to really be at people's throats a lot more. But Roger is able to have his usual charm, but it's kind of held in check a little bit, and it's really interesting to see Roger attack the role in that sort of way, and Guy Hamilton is encouraging him to be a bit edgier and be a bit rougher and a bit darker. And there are certain moments. It's always that scene with Andrea Anders in the hotel room where she gets roughed up a little bit, where it does come across as maybe being a bit much. But when you understand the story context as well, it's not entirely without purpose. And I think Roger's sort of questioning of that and his sort of misgivings combined with the fact that Andrea is a completely sympathetic, tragic character, that kind of gives that whole sequence a very nasty edge that maybe wasn't exactly intended. But then again, at that point, Bond and the audience are convinced that he's really up against it and he has to act fast and act quickly. Otherwise, his head will be on a golden platter with a golden bullet in it. So it's not entirely without purpose, but I think again, had they had the time they needed to finesse all of these elements just a bit more, I think some of those little rough spots could have been, sanded down a bit and polished up just a bit more as they were normally. But I still think it's a fantastic film. It is filled with fantastic performances. Again, I think it's quite possibly Christopher Lee's finest performance on screen. His joy of performance is so expressed in every single scene he's in that, yeah, again, not only is he one of the great Bond villains as Scaramanga, but it's just it's phenomenal to see him just so fully engaged. And as he said, Guy Hamilton was the man who got the Dracula out of me. And Hervé Villechaise's Knick-Knack is just, along with Lee Scaramanga, just completely iconic, unlike anything else. And every sequence the both of them are in are just beautiful, inspired, and bitingly hysterical at the same time. So um, this film is endlessly imaginative, and I wish it was looked at more seriously. And hopefully, this commentary will maybe help people to do that better. And by no means is this meant to be the definitive making of or history of the film, because were I doing that, this commentary would probably run something more like 22 hours. And I do these just with no frills, just whatever thoughts come into my head. So again, it's not professionally recorded, and so I try to make these pleasurable and interesting. And as Roger Moore himself would say in his own commentaries, which, if you haven't heard his commentaries for his Bond films, they're absolute musts. They are just essential. But as he would say, imagine this as a one-sided conversation with a friend of sorts. So, The Man with the Golden Gun is a film that's very near and dear to my heart, and a film I have defended ever since I first saw it, because I feel its bad reputation is completely undeserved, and it is a film with great merits within it that need to be examined more closely. And I think if more people understood the context in which it was made, particularly that it was really kind of rushed into production because Transamerica wanted another Bond film out fast, and that it was really the last of an era. It is the last Eon partnership produced film, and the last film with Guy Hamilton and Tom Mankiewicz, but particularly, most of all, the last film to have involvement from Harry Saltzman, who, again, I really do feel he kind of gets slighted overall in all the official stuff, because Bond was always Cubby's baby, and he carried it, and really until the day he died, and it kept it in the family, and Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli continue the tradition on now, but outside of name checking, nobody really talks about Harry all that much. And Saltzman really brought a vivid spark to the Bond films, and it's such an important key core value of what makes the Bond films special. And it really should be understood that this was the last one. And it's sad that it had to turn out this way. But of course, as with all the great time travel stories, if you go back in history and any slight thing is changed, then that alters the entire timeline. So there would be no telling what would have happened to Bond, and if it would have ended prematurely if Harry had stayed on somehow after The Man with the Golden Gun. So after the film's release and its box office not being the great numbers everybody hoped, and it wasn't as successful, significantly so, not just in box office numbers, but also the public's eye and the public's mindset. It became absolutely paramount that Eon had to redouble their efforts and really go for broke, which led into the sort of development hell nightmare on The Spy Who Loved Me, and it became a very long, very convoluted screenwriting process with many different writers, and I will go into that more in my next commentary, where I will return with a track, of course, on The Spy Who Loved Me. So this has been my commentary for 1974's The Man with the Golden Gun, a film I absolutely adore and cherish and enjoy coming back to every single time I watch it. I feel it is completely undervalued, and I really hope you enjoyed me babbling on about this film that has been sorely misrepresented and beaten around for pretty much ever since its original release. This is a fantastically wild, inventive, rough, and raw in places film where we get to see Bond really not exactly stripped down in a sense, but he really has to struggle in a way and frequently makes mistakes, which makes the grittiness and everything going on in a lot of ways even more believable, and the humor goes in different directions than had been seen before, which gives the film a certain freshness that I've always really appreciated. So hopefully you've gained some new insights if you've made it this far, all the way to the end. And as always, I am so pleased whenever I hear feedback on any of these tracks. It means the world to know that people can listen to my babbling on the Bond films and get some enjoyment and some insight out of these tracks I do. And so with that, thank you for enjoying The Man with the Golden Gun with me, and I will return next with a commentary for The Spy Who Loved Me. As always, I'm very humbly yours, the Motion Picture Analyst. This concludes Part 3 of the Mankiewicz trilogy.